Andre and Sydney, a love story, written by Barron Darby, narration by Jessica Ann Bogart. Prologue. The beach. There is a stretch of Atlantic coastline late in the afternoon where the light comes in low and a little gold, and the wind off the water is the wind that lifts a hem and pulls a few loose strands of hair across a woman's face without ruining what the photographer is trying to do. The photographer was 8 feet away. He had been there long enough that they had almost forgotten he was a photographer. The woman was 25 years old. She wore a long white dress that had been chosen for the way it would catch in the wind, and the wind had read its assignment and shown up. Her feet were bare. Her left hand rested on the new and small curve of her belly, which was about the size of a closed fist. Her right hand was inside the right hand of the man behind her, and inside their joined hands was a piece of paper, 4 inches long and 3 inches wide, printed in shades of ocean gray and ocean black, with the date stamped in the corner, 8 weeks. 2.5 ounces, about the size, the doctor had told them, of a kidney bean. The man was 30. He was a few inches taller than she was and had been an inch taller in college and not quite as broad. His shirt was open at the collar. His other hand had been on the small of her back for most of the afternoon, and once or twice he had moved it to the back of her neck because he did not entirely know what to do with his hands when something he had been waiting for was happening to his body and not to him. He had been a wide receiver. He had been a husband. Now he was about to be a father, and the line on the sonogram strip looked to him like the start line of a lane he had not run before. They did not say much for the first part of the shoot. The photographer asked them to look at each other, and they looked at each other and forgot the camera. The photographer asked them to look at the sonogram strip, and they looked at the sonogram strip and forgot the camera again. The photographer asked them, after a while, just to walk. The woman tucked her left hand into her right, where his hand was, and the strip was now between 3 hands, and they walked. The wind kept doing its job. The light kept doing its job. The Atlantic kept doing its job. The kidney bean inside the woman's body, which had no name yet because the parents had agreed to wait, was, for the moment, doing its job too. It had her attention. It would soon have everyone else's attention. There would be a caption. There would be a carousel of 8 photographs. There would be a national audience and a stadium of strangers reading 3 sentences over their morning coffee, and one of those sentences would be the one she had been writing in her head since the bathroom floor. She had been a girl in a kitchen in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, who painted an aisle in her head when she was 6 years old. The aisle had a number painted on it, and the number was 4. The bouquet was held like a baton. There was a finish line tape at the altar. Lane 4 was the lane nobody else wanted. Lane 4 was the lane she had grown up to be the only person who knew was hers. She was the youngest girl in a family of runners, and she had outrun every other girl her age in the country by the time she was 16. He had been a boy in Olney, Maryland, who watched his father stand at the door of a Baptist church on Sunday morning and watch the parking lot. His father had been a Marine. His father had played linebacker. His father had given him a sentence on a Sunday morning when he was about that age that he had carried with him into a hospital bed at the University of Virginia and into 3 NFL locker rooms across 2 seasons and into the apartment in California where he was now reading Greek paradigms before the sun came up. The sentence is for the 2nd chapter of this book. They had each other's attention. They had it the day a wide receiver in his parents' house in Olney saw a photograph of an Olympic hurdler in a coat, captioned with the title of a song that had 3 syllables. He had typed 9 words into a direct message on Instagram on a Tuesday in the early fall of a year when nobody was supposed to be doing anything they had been planning to do. She had answered. That was 4 years ago, more or less. 4 years was a small number to say out loud and a long time to live through. There had been a beach before there was this beach. There had been salmon, and they had eaten it with their hands. There had been a girls' trip in Arizona, and a videographer in a back seat, and a haircut photo that arrived a month too late. There had been an aisle in Madison, Virginia, on the 6th of May, and a storm front, nobody invited, and a sentence the husband had said into a phone at 8 in the morning that the wife would carry into the rest of her life. There had been Olympic gold and a world record that had been broken and broken again, and a crown his sister had been carrying around in a box for a year. There had been a kitchen with a sourdough starter on the counter that they had named and then forgotten to feed and then fed. There had been a night at a kitchen table in Los Angeles when one of them had almost said something they would never have been able to take back, and they had not said it. There had been a bathroom floor and a small white plastic stick. Now there was this beach. The photographer asked them, near the end, to hold the strip up to the sun. They did. The strip was thin enough that the sun came through it. The kidney bean was a small dark shape inside a small lighter shape, inside the soft pink of the woman's hand, inside the larger and darker hand of the man behind her. The wind picked up, the dress lifted. The woman laughed and said something the photographer did not catch. The man behind her caught it. What she had said was the sentence she had been writing in her head since the bathroom floor. The sentence was the caption that would, in the next 24 hours, be read by an entire stadium of strangers over their morning coffee. The sentence is for the last chapter of this book. He laughed too. The Atlantic kept doing its job. This is how they got there. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Sydney, the girl who always won and never felt it. The first lane I ever ran was lane 4 in our kitchen. On a piece of duct tape my father had cut into a number with a pair of scissors that lived in the drawer next to the refrigerator. I was 6. He had taped 4 numbers to the kitchen floor in a row, 1 for each of us, and he had assigned them in birth order. Taylor was lane 1 because Taylor was the oldest. Morgan was lane 2 because Morgan was after Taylor. I was lane 4 because Ryan was 4 years old, and getting a number meant something to him in a way it did not yet mean anything to me. Lane 3 was Ryan's. I was lane 4 because lane 4 was what was left. My father is Willie McLaughlin. If you are a track person, you may know that name. If you are not, the only thing you need to know is that he ran the 400 meters, and he was a semi-finalist at the 1984 United States Olympic Trials, and his personal best was 45.72, and he hung that number up in his head the way other men hang up their fishing rods. He did not run anymore by the time he was taping numbers to our kitchen floor. He timed his children instead. He had a stopwatch on a lanyard around his neck. He was a father who could clock 4 kids in a relay drill in a kitchen and not need to think about it. My mother is Mary Neumeister McLaughlin. She had been a 2:12 half-miler at Cardinal O'Hara High School in Tonawanda, New York. and she had run on the boys' team there because the girls' program at her school was not the place a 2:12 half-miler went to grow. She met my father at Manhattan College, where she managed the men's track team. She liked to say that she had been raised understanding the lanes were not always going to be the lanes she wanted. She did not want her daughter raised that way. My parents were 2 former runners with 4 athletic children, which is the situation that produces, in most American families, an all-day, all-weekend grind that breaks down small bodies before the small bodies have figured out what they want. My parents did the opposite. They told me, more than once, in the language people use when they have been telling each other something in private for a long time before they say it out loud to a child, that they did not want to overwhelm me with rigorous training at a young age. They wanted my body to grow first. They wanted my love for the sport to grow second. They did not want to force me into anything. I won my first New Jersey youth meet at 6 years old, and they did not enter me in another one for a while after that. I do not think I understood at the time what they were doing. I understand now. I will tell you what I imagined the day after that first kitchen relay, because it has come up so many times in my life since that I might as well put it on the page. I imagined an aisle. I had heard my mother and my aunts talk about an aisle. The aisle in my head had a number painted on it. The number was 4. The bouquet I would carry was shaped like a baton. There was a piece of finish line tape stretched across the spot where the priest would be standing. I do not know how to explain to a person who was not a 6-year-old girl in a kitchen in Scotch Plains in 1990-something that this was a perfectly normal thing for me to be picturing. Lane 4 was already mine. The aisle would also be mine. I had a working theory of my whole life by the time I was 7, and most of the theory turned out to be true. I went to Union Catholic Regional High School in Scotch Plains. My coach was Mike McCabe. If you are a track person, you also know that name. He had taken over our program in 2004, and the year before he got there, the girls' team had finished a single track meet with 7 points. He turned the program into the place that put me on a plane to Rio when I was 16 years old. He told a reporter once that he thought I was the greatest high school track and field athlete of all time, and now one of the greatest track athletes ever in the world. He has the right to say that, and I have the right to be embarrassed when he does. I am writing it down here because I do not want to pretend it never happened. I owe him that much honesty. I made the 2016 Olympic team in the 400-meter hurdles by running 54.15 at the trials in Eugene. That was a world junior record. I was a junior in high school. I had never finished a season. I do not entirely remember the trip to Eugene because the trip to Eugene was the moment my brain figured out what was happening, which was that the rest of my life was about to belong to a sport that did not yet know what to do with a girl who could run a junior world record before she had finished her senior year. My older brother Taylor would win silver at the World U20 Championships in the 400 hurdles that same summer. He would do it more or less the way I would do it, which was that he would run the race and then look up at the scoreboard and try to figure out what he had just done. We are a family of people who run first and process afterwards. Here is a thing about Rio that I have told before, because I want a stranger to this story to know it. I ate at the McDonald's in the Olympic Village. There is a McDonald's in the Olympic Village. They give the food away to the athletes for free. There were chefs in there cooking meals you fly across the world to compete on, and I went and got chicken McNuggets with sweet and sour sauce, because I was 16 years old and I was scared of every other person I might have had to talk to in the food court. I made it to the semifinals, and I let up a little down the back stretch because I wanted the race to be over. I have read sentences in interviews from athletes much older than I was who have admitted the same thing. Most of them admitted it later in their lives. I admitted it in time to fix it. That is the only generous thing I can say about being 17-year-old me. I came home from Rio and went back to high school. I will not say very much about my senior year. I've written about it in another book, and the people I am protecting are the same people I was trying to protect when I wrote about it the first time. I will only tell you the thing I have already told. There were practices where the other girls did not look at me. There were practices where they did, and the looking was worse. There were online comments. There was a phrase a therapist used later, post-Olympic depression, that I did not have the vocabulary for at the time, but understood without the vocabulary. I had won, and I had nothing. I had been somewhere, and I had brought nothing back. The only thing I had brought back was the feeling that I was now a person whose value to the people around me was a function of the next race I had not yet run. I had been raised in the Catholic Church. I had been at Mass on Sunday mornings my whole life. I knew the songs and the prayers and the order of the service. I had been confirmed. I had been a good Catholic schoolgirl in the way that good Catholic schoolgirls are good, which is to say that the structure had held me, but I had not yet inhabited it from the inside. The God I had grown up praying to was a God I did not want to upset. The God I needed to know was the God who was going to set me free. I would not meet him for a few more years. I want to tell you about one specific night. I was going to lose a race the next day, and I knew I was going to lose it. I had been losing inside my own head for weeks. I was lying on a hotel bed in some part of the country I cannot remember the name of, and the air conditioner was loud enough that I could hear it, but not loud enough to drown out the conversation I was having with myself. I tried to pray. I had been raised to pray, and I tried to pray. I said something to the ceiling like, "Lord, I know we don't have a relationship like that, but this is serious." I felt nothing. I went to sleep. I lost the next day. I tell you that night because the rest of this book is the answer to that night. I did not know it then. He did. He always does. I had his attention before I knew I had it, and he had been waiting for me to get tired enough of being the Lord of my own life, to let him be the Lord of mine. The girl who lay on that hotel bed listening to the air conditioner is the girl I have to tell you about first. The woman in the white dress on the beach, holding a sonogram strip in the gold afternoon light is, if we do this right, where we end up. We have a way to go. Chapter 2, Sydney, the McLaughlin kitchen. Take me back into the kitchen for a few more minutes. The kitchen is the room I owe. We were a family of 6. My father timed his children. My mother fed his children. There was, in our house in Scotch Plains, an organized chaos that you only get when 2 athletes have produced 4 athletic kids in a state where the public school district expects you to have your weekend free for a track meet. We had 4 sets of spikes in 4 different sizes and 4 different running schedules at 4 different age groups, and a calendar on the side of the refrigerator with a different child's race circled in a different color of pen on every other Saturday, for as long as I can remember. Taylor was the oldest. Taylor was 6 years older than I was. Taylor had been a hurdler since he was 11. Taylor had been our father's first project. Our father had run the 400 meters, and our father had been a semi-finalist at the trials in 1984. And the project of figuring out how to take what he had been and turn it into a son had taken our father most of Taylor's growing up years. Taylor had absorbed it. Taylor would, in 2016, win silver in the 400-meter hurdles at the IAAF World U20 Championships. The same summer, I would win bronze at the United States Olympic Trials and go to Rio at 16. We were, that summer, two siblings on different continents running the same race. I have, since, decided that this is the closest thing to a metaphor for our childhood I am going to put on the page. We were running the same race in different lanes. Taylor in lane 1, because Taylor was the oldest. Sydney in lane 4, because Sydney was the youngest girl. The race was the same race. Morgan was 3 years older than I was. Morgan had been the sister I shared a bathroom with. Morgan had been the sister whose closet I raided. Morgan was a runner too, although a different runner, a quieter one, who had been, in some ways, the most generous to me of any of my siblings, because Morgan had decided early that her job was to be the older sister of a girl who was about to become a story. She had not asked for that job. She had taken it. I have, the rest of my life, been more grateful to my sister Morgan than I have ever known how to put into words. The Morgan who put her hand on my back in the chair at the bridal shower had been the same Morgan who put her hand on my back at every track meet. I ran from age 9 to age 17. She had been there. She had been watching. She had been the older sister you could not see in the highlight reel, because the highlight reel does not have an angle for her. Ryan was the youngest. Ryan was 4 years younger than I was. Ryan had grown up watching his older sister become the person his older sister was becoming, and Ryan had, with the small, steady decision a younger brother has to make when his older sister starts being the family's headline, decided to keep running anyway. He had become a track athlete. He had not become my track athlete. He was his own track athlete. I will not pretend the difference was always easy on him. It was easy on me, because Ryan had decided early to be easy on me, and a younger brother who decides to be easy on his older sister is a younger brother a girl learning to live in public is grateful for. About my mother specifically. Until this chapter, I have only told you who she was as a runner. My mother had run on a boys' team in high school. The detail had, in our house, a way of arriving in conversations she did not quite mean to start. She would be making dinner on a Wednesday night, standing at the stove, and she would say something to one of us about how the boys' team at her high school had been good for her in a particular way. She would say that the boys had, in their own teenage boy fashion, simply assumed she could keep up, and that the assumption had been, in the long retrospect, the gift she had not known to ask for. She would say that her own coach in Tonawanda had not asked her to be smaller than she was. She would often look at me at the stove when she said it. I did not, at the time, fully understand why. I do now. My mother had 4 children. She had decided before we were born that the 4 of us would not be raised the way some other athletic families raise their children. We would not be sent to elite training programs at 8 years old. We would not be made to run track meets on weekends we did not want to run. We would not be turned, in the way some families turn their athletic children, into small specific projects. She would tell us over and over that our jobs were to be children first. Our father had agreed with her. Our father had been the one with the stopwatch and the tape and the kitchen floor relays. But our father had also been the one who would, on the days we did not want to run, take us to get a Slurpee and not say anything about practice. My parents had, in the slow, steady way good parents have, drawn a line around the part of our childhood that was not going to be track. The line had held. I am 30 seconds into trying to write you a sentence about my parents' line that does not sound, to my own ear, like a press release. I will give up. The line was real. The line had been our childhood. The line had been the reason I could, at 22 years old, fall in love with a Marine son in a Christian section of a Barnes & Noble we never quite made it to. Now, my senior year of high school, because I have already told you in the first chapter that I am not going to tell you very much about my senior year of high school, and I owe the sentence after that one a few more sentences. The year I came back from Rio was the year a great many small, specific friendships I had thought were friendships turned out to be the attention some teenagers give a teenager who has, for a few weeks, become a story. The story had been the whole year. The story had been on the cover of magazines I was being handed by adults at school. The story had been on the screens of phones that the girls I had been having lunch with in the cafeteria for 3 years were suddenly holding up to other girls I did not know. The story had not been me. I want to be clear about that. The story had been a version of me. The version of me on the magazine cover was a version a great many of the people in my high school had not been prepared to be in the lunchroom with. The lunchroom got quieter. The locker room got quieter. The whispers had a small, specific volume, a volume that says it is not for you to hear, and that you will hear anyway. I went home most afternoons that year and lay on my bed in the room I had grown up in. My mother knew. My mother did not, in the way some mothers might have tried to fix it. She brought me a cup of tea sometimes. She would sit on the edge of the bed for 10 minutes and not say anything. She had been raised understanding the lanes were not always going to be the lanes she wanted, and she had decided early, when her 4 children had started running, that she was not going to be a mother who tried to put them in the lane she wanted them to be in. She had decided to be a mother who would sit on the edge of the bed. My father, in the same months, would, on Saturday afternoons, ask me whether I wanted to go to the track. He did not ask in a way that pressured me. He asked the way a father asks his daughter whether she wants to go for a drive. Sometimes I went, sometimes I did not. The going was not the point. The point was that he asked. The point was that the door was open. The point was that I, in the worst spring of my high school career, had not been left to figure it out alone. I will not give you the names of the girls. I will not give you the specific things they said. I have, in the years since, decided that the names and the things are theirs, and that I do not need to give them more attention than they have already taken. One therapist told me, a few months later, sitting in an office with a small box of tissues on the table between us, she told me that what I had been going through had a name. She called it post-Olympic depression. I had not, until that afternoon, known there was a name for it. I had not known I was allowed to be sad. The name had, in the way naming things will, given me permission to put down a small, specific weight I had not realized I had been carrying. I cried in her office for 30 minutes. I went home. I told my mother. She made me a sandwich. She sat with me at the kitchen counter while I ate. the small specific thing my mother said to me at the counter that afternoon, because the sentence has carried me through more than one Olympic cycle since. She said, "Sydney, the lanes are going to keep changing. You have always known which lane is yours. You will know the next one when it comes." I went upstairs. I lay on my bed. I looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had been since I was 6. The ceiling was about to be a college ceiling, and then a professional ceiling, and then a married ceiling, and then a mother's ceiling. The lanes were going to keep changing. She was right. Chapter 3. Andre, Olney, Maryland. I am the son of a Marine. I should put that on the page first, because every other thing I'm about to tell you about myself was shaped by it. My father is Andre Levrone Sr. He served. He played linebacker. He is, in physical terms, a unit, by which I mean he is a man who fills a doorframe and does not have to do anything about it for you to feel filled. My friends used to back up half a step the first time they met him in our driveway. My wife now does the same thing, and she is an Olympic gold medalist who runs into the side of a hurdle for a living. Senior is senior. I am junior. I am junior in every way. We grew up in Olney, Maryland. We attended a Baptist church on Sunday morning every Sunday, and most Wednesday evenings, and many Saturdays for the pancake breakfast, and a great many summer weeks for what we called teen camp, and what was, in fact, a tightly run program of basketball and Bible study, with a small amount of sleep at the edges. My mother is Andre Levrone. She had been a track athlete and a gymnast and a cheerleader, and she had a working knowledge of every form of athletic discipline that her body had once asked of it. She ran our youth ministry for as long as I was a child in it. My older brother Jonathan would later serve a tour in Iraq as a tanker in the United States Army, and my older sister Raquel would later become a woman who plans an Olympic crown a year in advance and brings it to the stadium in a box. We were a family of people who showed up. Senior was on the security team at our church. He stood at the front door on Sunday mornings, hands folded in front of him, watching the parking lot. He did this for years. He did not do it because anything was happening in the parking lot. He did it because something might. He had told me once, on a Sunday morning when I was about 10 years old, the sentence I have been carrying ever since. "You don't have to be loud, son. You have to be there." He said it the way men of his bearing say things, which is once. He looked at me and looked back at the parking lot and folded his hands. I did not understand the sentence the day he gave it to me. I understood it differently every year afterward, and I am still understanding it differently. There is no week of my life in which that sentence has not done me a favor. I was baptized at 10. I knew what I was doing. I have known what I was doing every time since, although in different ways and at different temperatures. The Christian life is, the New Testament tells us, a progressive sanctification. And progressive sanctification is a phrase that turns my wife's eyes a little glassy when I use it at the kitchen table. So I am going to drop the phrase here and translate. Sanctification is just the word for the slow business of becoming the man God has been telling you all along you were going to be. I have had hills. I have had valleys. I have had stretches where I could feel the man God had in mind for me arriving in increments, and stretches where the increments were going the other way. I am 30 years old. I am still in the middle of it. I expect to be in the middle of it for a while. Football showed up early. I went to Our Lady of Good Counsel High School in Olney. We won 4 straight Maryland state championships when I was there. which is a run that teaches a young man 2 things at once. The first thing it teaches him is that winning is good and worth doing. The second thing it teaches him, if he is paying attention, is that winning by itself is a thinner soup than the highlight reel will lead him to believe. We were good. We were very good. We were, on a few specific Saturdays, the best high school football team in the state. I did not, on any of those Saturdays, feel the thing the highlight reel said I was supposed to feel. The trophy was there. I was there. The trophy and I were not having the same conversation. I went to the University of Virginia on a football scholarship and a communications major. I will spare you the recruiting story. The story I want to tell you about UVA happened in the fall of my 3rd year, when I fractured a vertebra in my back and lost the final 11 games of the 2016 season. They put me in a hospital bed for a few nights. My mother drove up. My team chaplain came every day. He was a man of a patience that is not, I now know, the natural state of any man, and is therefore evidence that the Spirit is at work in him. And he came to my hospital room and read the book of Romans with me, a chapter at a time, the way you eat oatmeal when you are sick. I had met God before that hospital bed, but the body of a wide receiver who could not move is a body that is forced to listen, and a man who is forced to listen is a man God has more access to. I came back the next year in 2017 as part of what the program record book remembers as the historic receiving trio of Levrone, Olamide Zacchaeus, and Donnie Dowling. The first time in the program's history that 3 Cavaliers receivers each cleared 600 yards in a single season. We were not supposed to do that. I was not supposed to be on a football field that fall at all. The chaplain came to a few of those games. He sat in the stands. He looked the same way Senior looked at the front door of our Baptist church. Senior year, I took over our team Bible study. We met on Wednesday nights. There were 3 guys at the first meeting. There were 4 guys at the second. By mid-season, there were 15. And by the end of the season, we were praying together at the 50-yard line after games, win or lose, in a small huddle that would sometimes pull in a tight end from the other team, and sometimes a referee. The platform was, I noticed, beginning to change shape in my hands. It was not a microphone yet. It was an antenna. I went undrafted. I had been preparing for the possibility for months, and the possibility had still arrived as a small, specific knife. I signed with the Baltimore Ravens as an undrafted free agent on the 4th of May, 2018. I was waived on the 1st of September. I was released on the 2nd. The professional dream had a length the first time it ended, and the length was 4 months and a day. Here is what I did when the call came. I called Senior. I told him I was home. He said, "Stay ready, son." The next door opens for the man who is still standing at it. He hung up. He had not told me to feel any particular way about getting cut. He had told me what to do. I caught back on with the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad in December of 2018, and I signed with the Carolina Panthers on the 4th of February 2019, and I had a preseason in Carolina that flashed in the way an undrafted receiver hopes will get him a contract, and did not. I was cut. I was 24 years old. I had by then been in 3 NFL locker rooms and on 3 different practice squads, and I had been a teammate who was preparing to outwork the men around him in a way that the men around him had begun to notice. I was, the locker rooms had told me, salt. I was beginning to understand that salt is not a flavor. Salt is a preservative. The men around me were not making $20 or $40 million a year because they wanted to know more about flavor. They wanted to know what was preserving me. I drove home to Olney. I sat across the kitchen table from Senior and did not say anything for a long time. He listened. He nodded. He did not have to tell me what he meant, because what he meant was the sentence he had given me on a Sunday morning 20 years earlier and had not had to repeat since. He had been there. I took a meeting the next month at Mackenzie Commercial Real Estate Services in Baltimore, December of 2019. I started as an advisor. I learned a new vocabulary. I learned to put on a suit that does not need to apologize for itself in a conference room. I prayed every morning that the Lord would put a microphone in my hand again, and I trusted Him to know what kind of room the microphone would be in. I did not know yet that the room I was about to walk into was going to be a screen on the other side of the country, where a girl in California I had never met had just posted a photograph captioned with the title of a song. I did not know yet that I was about to slide into her direct mentions like the corny man I in fact am. I am getting ahead of myself. The year was about to be 2020. The world was about to stop. The boy from Olney, whose father had taught him to be there, was about to find out what being there was going to mean for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. Sydney, November 2020. I lived alone for most of 2020. I was in California by then. I had a coach named Bobby Kersey, who had inherited me earlier that year, and who would, over the course of the next 4 years, teach me how to run an event I had been running for 9 years already. I had a season that had been canceled. I had a sport that had no calendar. I had a city outside my window that had been told to stay inside, the way every city had been told to stay inside. And I had a body that did not yet know what to do with the absence of a track. I want to tell you what it is like to have your whole life be running and to lose, all at once, the thing your whole life is. The first week of it feels like a vacation. The second week feels like a question. The third week feels like a slow dissolving of the answer to that question. By the fourth week, I was sitting on a couch in an apartment in California, and I could feel, in my chest, the thing I had been keeping at the edge of my chest for a decade. I had thought it was nerves. I had thought it was anxiety. I had thought it was the specific pressure of the night before an important race. I learned, over the course of the spring and summer of 2020, that it was none of those things. It was a question I had not yet allowed myself to ask out loud. The question was whether anything I had been doing for the last 10 years had been about anything other than not being unloved. I had been raised in the Catholic Church. I have already said that. I knew the songs and the prayers and the order of the service. I had been confirmed. I had been told by people whose love for me I do not doubt that the way to be a good child of God was to do the right things and not do the wrong things, and to be on time for Mass on Sunday morning. The God I had grown up praying to was a God you did not want to upset. He was, in my child's understanding, a judge. He was a judge with a clipboard. He had been keeping a list. The list was the reason a girl who could outrun every other girl her age had spent her whole life being afraid she was going to disappoint someone. I had been raised to be afraid of God. I had not been raised to know Him. I was alone in an apartment on a Tuesday afternoon in the fall of 2020 when I started to understand that this was not going to hold. I was on my couch. I had run that morning. I had eaten lunch. I had more or less done the things I was supposed to do, and the things I was supposed to do were no longer scaffolding for anything that felt like a life. I was tired. I was tired in the deep way. You can be tired when you are not actually tired. I had been the lord of my own life for so long that the lord of my own life was exhausted. I went onto YouTube and put a sermon on. I do not remember whose sermon it was. I had a Bible somewhere in a drawer. I went and got it. I sat on the floor with the Bible on my knees and the sermon playing on my laptop. And I was a 21-year-old woman whose body had been made to run a 400-meter hurdle race and whose soul had not been touched in any real way in a decade. I do not have a moment to give you. I would like to. I have read enough conversion stories in my life to know that the testimony you remember is the testimony with a moment in it, the one with the lightning and the floor, and the eye will never be the same. I do not have one of those. What I have is the slow giving up of November 2020. I sat on that floor for a long time. I went back to that floor again the next day, and the day after that. I started Googling churches I could attend on a Sunday morning if Sunday morning ever returned to being a thing my life would have. I downloaded a Bible app on my phone. I started to make notes in the margin of the Bible I had pulled out of the drawer. The notes were not impressive notes. They were the notes of a woman who had been raised inside the structure of faith and was, for the first time, walking around inside the rooms. I want to tell you something a friend would not necessarily think to ask me, because a friend would assume an Olympic gold medalist's conversion would happen on a podium under stadium lights. It did not. It happened on a couch in California, in the middle of a global lockdown. There was no scoreboard. There was no announcer. There was nobody in the stands. The Lord met me where He always meets us, which is in the chair we are already sitting in. I did not tell anybody for a while. I did not even tell my mother, because I did not yet know what I had to tell. By the time I had words for it, it was the middle of November. I will give you the date the way I would give a date to a coach who needed it for his planning. November of 2020. That was when I came to the end of myself. That was when Christ was so kind to reveal Himself to me. I was not the only person in the world who came to the end of themselves that fall. I happened to be the one writing this book. I will tell you a thing I did not know at the time, which is a thing you only get to know in retrospect, and which I have come to think of as one of the small kindnesses the Lord folds into a person's story to remind them later that He had been working on the whole picture and not just their corner of it. In November of 2020, while I was sitting on that floor, a former NFL wide receiver named Andre Levrone Jr. was sitting in front of a microphone in Maryland recording a podcast called Walking Away from the NFL Dream. We did not know each other yet. We had not spoken. He had not yet seen the photograph I would post on Instagram. A few weeks later, the one with the song lyric in the caption. He had not yet typed the 9 words that would change my life. He was a man on the other end of the country, the same fall, recording the testimony of a year that had already changed his life. And he was, although neither of us knew it yet, a few weeks away from the rest of mine. I had, that fall, his attention. I had, that fall, started to give him mine. I would not be told for a while, in the small and specific ways the Lord has of telling us things, that there was a boy in Olney, Maryland, who had been preparing for me for as long as I had been preparing for him. I would eventually be told. I would eventually see the message request on my phone, The message would arrive on a Tuesday, more or less. It would say one thing. It would say I had his attention. It would ask one question. The question was how he could get mine. Part 2. The Slide. Chapter 5. Andre, you have my attention. I am going to tell on myself. I would like to tell you that I met my wife in the Christian section of a Barnes & Noble. I would like to tell you that we reached for the same John Piper book, and our hands touched on the spine. And we looked up at each other the way men and women in the Christian section of a Barnes & Noble are supposed to look up at each other. And the rest of our story flowed from there with the dignity I would prefer to have on the first page of my marriage. I would like that very much. It is, however, not what happened. What happened is that I slid into her direct mentions on Instagram. There is no Christian way to dress that sentence up. I went to her direct mentions and I sent her a message. And the message was the message of a corny man to a woman he has been thinking about for longer than is appropriate to admit. My wife will, on a podcast, sometimes describe the slide as honorable. I appreciate her for that. I will, in the privacy of these pages, describe it as what it was, which is the move of a man who had asked his plan A, a mutual friend who happened to have gone to UVA with me and to high school with Sydney, whether Sydney was single, and who had been told, with no particular speed and no particular interest in helping me, that she was. Plan A had not put us on. Plan A had taken her time. Plan B was the slide. I had followed Sydney's account first. She had followed me back. I had then waited 2.5 weeks before sending a message, because I did not yet know what kind of man I was going to be on her phone screen, and I had decided, in a way that probably says more about my church security team upbringing than I would like to admit, that I should not move until I knew. I was not in the habit of making moves. I had not first stood at the door of for a while. She posted a photograph one evening that fall. She was wearing a long coat. The caption was a single word. The word was the title of a song with 3 syllables. I read the caption 3 times. I picked up my phone. I typed 9 words into the message field. I read them 4 times. I prayed before I hit send. That mattered. I am, by my mother's training and my father's example, a man who prays before he picks up a phone if he thinks the phone call is going to matter. I prayed before the message because the message was going to matter. The prayer was short. The prayer was, Lord, this is in your hands. Please open the door, if it is the door, and please close the door if it is not the door. And either way, give me the wisdom to read you. I hit send. You've got my attention. How do I get yours? I will not pretend I came up with that on the spot. I had been a wide receiver. I had been a man whose job was to get open. I had spent a decade running routes designed to put me in the line of sight of a quarterback who already knew where I was going to be. The line was a route. The line was the route. I had sat in a parent's house in Olney, Maryland, 3 weeks after retiring from football, and I had run the cleanest route of my career into the message field of an Olympic gold medalist I had never met. And the route was, in the way certain routes will be, when the man running them has done his homework, exactly the right route. She wrote back. We texted for a few days. The texting became FaceTime. FaceTime became, more or less by the second week, a Bible study. I am going to ask you to take that sentence at face value because I am not going to make it sound more impressive than it was. We were 2 people on different coasts in the middle of a worldwide lockdown. both of us a few weeks into a faith we were each, in different ways, taking more seriously than we had taken anything else in our lives, and we had nothing to do all day. So we read Romans. I would set up my phone against a stack of books on a kitchen counter in Maryland, and she would set up her phone against a stack of cookbooks on a kitchen counter in California, and we would meet on a screen at 8 o'clock her time and 10 o'clock mine, and we would read. I was not trying to impress her. I will be honest. I was trying to understand whether the woman whose photograph had stopped me 3 weeks earlier was a woman whose mind worked the way I needed a woman's mind to work. I was praying about marriage at that age, in the way men of my temperament pray about marriage at that age, which is with a certain amount of low-grade hyperventilation and a great deal of asking the Lord to put a specific kind of woman in front of me. I was not looking for a girlfriend. I was looking, although I would not have used the word at the time because the word would have scared her off, for a wife. I told her so eventually. She did not flinch. I had a job at Mackenzie Commercial Real Estate Services in Baltimore that I had taken the December before. I was, even a year in, still learning a new vocabulary. I was, that month and the next, in a few small business meetings around the country, the kind a junior advisor takes to learn the room. I told Sydney, 3 weeks into our texting, that I had a business meeting in Los Angeles. The first half of the sentence was true. The second half was a flight I had already booked because I needed to see her face in front of me. I am putting that on the page because she has already put it on the page on a podcast, and we have laughed about it many times in many kitchens since. I flew out. I was not nervous in the way I should have been. I had been nervous in NFL cuts. I had been nervous before 3 preseason starts. I was on the flight to Los Angeles, the calm a man is when his body has started to recognize the lane it is supposed to be in. I landed. I rented a car. I drove to her. I want to give you the first date so you have the picture I have. We went to a beach. There was salmon. The salmon was supposed to be eaten with utensils. We were laughing too hard to remember the utensils. We ate it with our hands. We were 2 people who had been talking on a screen for 3 weeks, and the screen had been a faithful screen, and the screen had also turned out to be a screen, which is to say that the woman in front of me was funnier than the woman on the screen, and the woman in front of me had a small and specific way of touching her own elbow when she was thinking, and the woman in front of me said the Lord in a way that I had heard preached but not lived for a long time. We walked down the beach with our shoes in our hands. The wind off the water was the wind off the Pacific, which is not a friendly wind to a Maryland man, but I was not in a position to mind. The sun went down. We did not kiss. I was not going to kiss her on a first date, because the men I had been raised by did not kiss women on first dates, and the woman I was sitting next to had already told me, in what was now 30 different ways, that she had not flown me out for that. Here is the verse that came into my head on the drive back to my hotel. I had been reading the Song of Solomon at the seminar, pace I was reading everything that fall, which was slowly. There is a line in the 8th chapter of the Song of Solomon that I had read a few days earlier, and the line had stayed with me the way certain lines do, and the line came back to me as I sat at a red light on a road in Los Angeles I will probably not be able to find again. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? I had not said it out loud to anyone yet. I would say it out loud eventually to the rest of America, In a comment under an Instagram post Sydney made the following August, the light turned green. I drove back to my hotel. I called Senior. He was awake because Senior is awake. I told him where I was. I told him what I had done. He said one sentence. He said, "Stay ready, son." He hung up. He had not asked for a single detail beyond the one I had given him, because the detail I had given him was the only one a Marine asks his son for. I flew back to Maryland 4 days later. I sat on my parents' couch with a coffee in my hand. I was 30 pounds lighter than I had been the year before, because that is what NFL cuts and a December job and a Los Angeles trip will do to a man's body. I called Sydney. I waited for the FaceTime to connect. I had been the guy whose route had been the right route. I was now the guy whose job was to keep running the route week after week across a country until the route ended at an altar. That, it turns out, was the long part. Chapter 6. Sydney, the 3-week test. Know something about me before the next part. I am, when I am paying attention, a detective. I've been a detective my whole life. I am a woman who notices the timestamp on a photograph somebody has sent her to make her think they are somewhere they are not. I am a woman who can tell, from the way a man speaks to his mother on a phone call, more or less the entire shape of the marriage he is going to have with anybody else. I am, in particular, a woman who, when a man slides into her direct mentions, will message her oldest girlfriend within 15 minutes and ask the only question that matters. The friend in question was a woman I had gone to high school with at Union Catholic. She had then gone to UVA. She had, as it happened, been in the same friend group as Andre when she was at UVA. She had, as it later came out, been telling Andre about me for months before he ever followed me on Instagram. The reason Andre had not been put on by her and had had to make his own move was that this friend was an only when the time is right person, and the time, for whatever reason of her own, had not been right. She had not introduced us. She had let him stew. I will, in this life, never get a full explanation from her about her timeline, and I have decided not to ask. The Lord uses the timing the Lord chooses. Apparently, he uses my high school friends too. I messaged her the night Andre followed me on Instagram. I asked her what was wrong with him. Here's the message I sent. Just tell me what's wrong with him. There has to be something. Tell me the flaw. I expected a flaw. I had been in the public eye since I was 16 years old. I had been receiving direct messages from men since I was 17. I had developed the skill of finding the flaw within the first 30 seconds, because the flaw was almost always there. She wrote back, and the answer she gave me has, in my marriage, become a kind of joke I make at dinner parties. She told me there was nothing. She told me he was focused on football and on school and on his family and on his faith, and that, as far as she had seen at UVA, he was the same man on Tuesday that he was on Sunday. I read her message 3 times and called my mother. My mother said, "Sydney, that does not happen. There is something wrong. Wait." I waited. I followed him back. He went silent for 2.5 weeks. I told my mother that the silence was, in itself, a flaw. I had a thesis. The thesis was that he was Plan A's slow roll, and that the slow roll had happened to come back around. The thesis turned out to be wrong, but I want you to hear that I had it, because the woman I was at the time was a woman who needed a thesis. The thesis was the wall I had built between myself and a life I was afraid of wanting. He sent the message I have already let him tell you about. I read it 4 times. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. I read it again. I put it back down. I went and made tea, which is what I do when I do not know what to do. I came back and I wrote back. I am not going to tell you what I wrote back because what I wrote back is for him. I will tell you that the texting started, that it became FaceTime by the end of the week, and that by the 2nd week, we were reading the book of Romans together over a screen at 8 o'clock my time and 11 o'clock his. I was 3 months into my faith. He was 3 weeks into knowing me. I was in California in a global lockdown with a coach I had only just hired and a season that did not exist, and I had a former NFL wide receiver in Maryland who had taken a job in commercial real estate the same December I had taken Christ as my Lord. I want to be careful with the next sentence. I will write it the way it is true and not the way it is impressive. The thing that disarmed me about Andre Levrone Jr. in those first 3 weeks of phone calls and FaceTimes and Romans 7 verses I did not yet have a good handle on was that he wanted me to know Jesus more than he wanted me to know him. I had never had a man do that before. I had had men want me to like them. I had had men want me to admire them. I had had a particular kind of Christian man want me to think well of his Christianity. I had not had a man of any denomination sit on a screen in his parents' house in Maryland and ask me whether I had any idea how loved I was by Christ, and then look genuinely interested in my answer. I told him 3 weeks in that I was not looking for a boyfriend. I told him that I was looking for a brother and that I had not yet decided whether he could be one. He did not flinch. He said something to the effect of, "Take all the time you need, ma'am." He said ma'am the way a Marine son says ma'am, which was without thinking about it, and which was, against my will, the moment I started to be in trouble. He flew out. I have already let him tell you about the salmon. I will not repeat the story. I will tell you the part of the day he did not tell you, which is that, in the middle of dinner, his phone rang, and the screen said Mom, and he excused himself and walked 4 steps away from our table and answered the phone and said, "Yes, ma'am," and listened, and said, "Yes, ma'am," again, and listened, and said, "I love you too, Mom," and hung up. He came back to the table. He apologized for taking the call. I told him not to apologize. I had been watching the way he had been holding his shoulders during the call. I had been watching the way his right hand, the one not holding the phone, had been resting on the back of his neck. I had been watching the small, specific, unglamorous evidence that the man in front of me was a son before he was a date. I had been raised by a Marine's daughter and a former sprinter, and one of the things they had given me, without ever sitting me down to tell me about it, was a working detector for what a man's love for his mother sounded like, in his voice. The detector went off. The detector said that one. I told nobody for a month. I did not tell my mother for 2. I did not tell my sister Morgan until much later, because Morgan would have read me in 3 sentences flat, and Morgan was busy with her own life, and I wanted for once to know a thing alone before the women I love came in and confirmed it for me. Here is the harder part, because the love story would be cheap without it. We had hills. We had valleys. We had a couple of valleys. There was a phone call somewhere in the middle of those 9 months that went long because it had to, and there was a sentence one of us almost said and pulled back, and I will not tell you which one of us almost said it, because that detail belongs to the other one. I will only tell you that we did not end it. I am glad we did not end it. I have been glad every day since. I do not have a moment for you in that long stretch that turned the relationship into an inevitability. I have 1,000 small moments. I have a man learning to FaceTime me before practice in California, in the dark, with my hair in a bonnet, because the time difference made it impossible to talk after work. I have a man who would mail me books, sometimes by overnight, with a small note in the front cover that said only, "Read this whenever you can." I have a man who told me, in the middle of one of our worst fights, "I am not going to do this with you the way other men have done this with you. We are going to pray, and we are going to wait 24 hours, and we are going to pick this back up with the Holy Spirit in the room." I am writing that down because at the time, it made me so angry, I could have thrown the phone. I am writing it down because 3 days later, it had saved us. I have a faith now. I had a thesis then. The thesis fell. The faith stayed. I had, by the summer of 2021, his attention. I had, by the summer of 2021, started to give my life to his attention. And I had also, by the summer of 2021, started to suspect that the man on the other end of the FaceTime was, in some specific and inconvenient way, going to be the man I gave my life to next. The world was about to find out about both. Chapter 7. Andre, 8 months. I flew out to see her once a month. I want to tell you that I made that rule because of a verse I had read, or because of a podcast I had listened to, or because of a conversation I had with a pastor at our local church. I did not. I made that rule because I had a body that wanted to fly out twice a month, and a checking account that wanted to fly out once every other month, and a calling that wanted to fly out exactly the right number of times. Once a month was the calling. I had a job. I was new at the job. I was an advisor at McKinsey. I was learning what an estuple was. I was learning what a triple net lease was. I was learning to put my hand out at the end of a meeting and remember to look the man across the conference table in the eye while I did it. I was, that whole spring of 2021, doing the kind of work a man does when he is about to be 27 and is finally beginning to understand that the work of his 30s was going to be different from the work of his 20s. I had been a wide receiver. The wide receiver years had ended. The new years had started. The new years included Sydney. They were one of the things the new years included. I will not pretend they were the only thing. I had a job. I had a family. I had a Bible study that some of my friends were running on Tuesdays, and that I was, on the Tuesdays, I was in town, attending. I had a mother who needed her oldest son to come over for Sunday dinner more often than her oldest son had been coming over. I had a father who had not asked me since the day I retired to come over for Sunday dinner more often, but who would, when I came, hand me a plate without making me ask for it. She had a season. She had a coach who was new. She had an Olympic year in front of her that nobody, including her, fully knew the shape of yet. She was running practice times that were, by the back half of June, beginning to make her coach's eyebrow do a thing. I would watch the times come in on the chats with our friends. I would not say anything to her about it on FaceTime. I had decided early that her track was not going to be my topic. Her track had a coach. Her track had its own audience. I was not going to be a man whose love for his girlfriend doubled as a second comment thread on the splits she had run that morning. I would ask her how she was. I would ask her how she had slept. I would ask her, in the language men of my temperament use when they are trying to ask the harder question, whether she was tired. I let her tell me, when she wanted to tell me, what was happening on the track. The rest of the time I let the track stay where the track lived. The hills and valleys she has already told you about were real. I want you to know that I do not regret a single one of them. We were two people from different states who had each begun to get serious about a faith neither of us had inhabited from the inside for very long. Two people in that situation are going to fight. They are going to fight for the reasons two people in any new marriage of any temperament are going to fight. And they are going to fight a little harder because the new posture they have each just taken is the kind of posture that will, the first few times they pick a fight from inside it, make the fight louder than it needs to be. We had a couple of nights where we picked a fight from inside the new posture. I have since written some of the sentences I almost said in a journal so I would not forget them. I will not put them on the page because the woman I love does not need to read sentences I almost said and chose not to. I will only tell you that I almost said them, and that the not saying was, the first few times I learned how to do it, the hardest thing I had ever asked of myself. The summer crawled. I want to say that, because the summer crawled. I'd been running routes in a Carolina preseason 2 summers earlier, and I had thought the wait between snaps was long. The wait between flights to California was longer. I would be at my desk in Baltimore at 2 in the afternoon, and it would be 11 in the morning her time. And I would know, because I knew her schedule by heart by then, that she was just coming off the track. I would picture her walking back to the locker room. I would picture the way she would be drinking water. I would picture the way she would be looking up at her coach and listening, with the small, flat patience she has when she is listening to a man whose authority she trusts. I would close my laptop. I would walk down the hall to make a coffee. I would, on the way, pray a sentence I had been praying since the Bible study at UVA. Lord, prepare me to be the man you are preparing for the woman you are preparing for me. I had been praying that sentence for 3 years before I ever sent the 9-word message. I was still praying it. July came. The Tokyo Olympics had been rescheduled to that summer because the world had finally figured out how to host an Olympics in a pandemic. I sat on a couch in Maryland late at night and watched my girlfriend run the 400-meter hurdles in a way that I am going to tell my children about. She broke her own world record. She ran 51.46. She had put together, in the last 100 meters of the race, the kind of race that the people who knew the sport were going to say was the kind of race that changes the sport. I was on the couch. I was not in Tokyo. I had, after some prayer, decided not to be. I had felt, in the way I sometimes feel things, that the day belonged to her and to her family and to the specific community of women who had been raising her toward that line for 15 years, and that the right thing for the man she had not yet married to do was to be on a couch in Maryland praying her around the curve. I prayed her around the curve. The curve held. She crossed the line. The clock said 51:46. I sat on the couch with my hands open on my knees, and I cried in the way that men of my temperament cry, which is to say that I cried without sound and was a little embarrassed about the wet on my face. I called Senior the next morning. I told him I was going to ask her. I had told him I was going to ask her in some form 3 or 4 times before, because I had been working myself up to the question for most of the summer. Senior, who has the patience of a Marine and the dryness of a Marine, said one thing. He said, "Then go ask her, son." I bought a ring. I called her best friend. I called her sister Morgan. I called Raquel. I built a plan. The plan had a videographer in it. The plan had a girls' trip in Arizona in it. The plan had a haircut photo in it that I sent her the morning of, taken a month before, in the dumb hope that a woman who has been a detective her whole life would be too distracted to check the date on the file. She was not too distracted. She is never too distracted. I will let her tell you about the haircut. I flew west. Part 3. The Promise. Chapter 8. Sydney, August, at the Four Seasons. I had a month I was not entirely a person for. It was the August of 2021. I had broken my own world record in a final at the Tokyo Olympics. I had won my second gold medal of the Games on the 4x400 relay. I had released a clothing line. I had turned 22. I had, by the time the dust cleared, become a person I did not yet recognize in any of the photographs people were sending me of myself. My mother told me at one point that month that I had to remember that I was the same person I had been on the 31st of July. I tried to remember. The trying was, by itself, exhausting. I had also, for the last 9 months, been talking to a man on a screen who had, I was beginning to realize, been waiting for the moment the dust would clear so he could show up under the new sky. Now, Arizona. My friends had planned a girls' trip for my birthday. They had planned it for after the Olympics on purpose, because I had been working since I was 16 years old, and they had decided, more or less amongst themselves, that I was going to spend the first weekend after Tokyo by a pool in Scottsdale, with a piña colada in my hand, while they took turns giving me the kind of grief that only women you have known since you were 13 years old can give you. I went. I packed the kind of bag a woman packs for her own birthday, in a state where the temperature is 110 degrees in August, and the humidity is 0. I flew out. We checked into the Four Seasons. I will give you the day. We had spent the morning at the pool. We had spent the afternoon at lunch. I had been on a phone call with Andre at about 3 in the afternoon, and Andre had told me, on the call, that he was at home in Maryland and was about to go get a haircut. He sent me a picture of himself in the chair with the cape on. Here is what was wrong with the picture. The picture was a little dim. The mirror behind him was a mirror I had seen in another picture before. The shirt he was wearing in the picture was a shirt he had been wearing in a different picture I had seen the previous month. I will not tell you that I knew, at 3 in the afternoon Mountain Time, exactly what I knew by 6 o'clock that night. I will tell you that I had a working hypothesis by 4. I am, as we have established, a detective. I went up to the room to get ready for dinner. My friends had told me dinner was going to be at the kind of restaurant that requires a reservation a month in advance, which, in retrospect, should have been my second clue. I came out of the bathroom in a dress I had bought for the trip, and I came around the corner into the suite, and there was a man in the suite I did not know, and the man had a video camera. I stopped. I said, "Who is this?" My friends made eye contact with each other in a way that confirmed, finally, what I had already suspected. They told me that since my YouTube channel was bad, they were going to make a vlog of the trip for me, and that the man with the camera was their gift. I said, "Okay," I told myself, in the middle of the saying, "Sydney, do not freak out. Just play it off. You are a calm woman. Calm women do not announce their hypotheses to videographers in hotel suites." We got into the car. The videographer rode with us, in the back seat, asking me casual questions for the camera. I am going to admit something here. I do not remember most of the questions. I remember the steering wheel of the car. I remember the way the light was coming through the window. I remember thinking, with the clarity of a woman who has just made an Olympic team and won 2 golds at it and broken her own world record in front of the entire planet, that I was, in the next 30 minutes, going to be engaged. I do not know how I managed to keep my face on my face. I think the body of a girl who has been racing under the pressure of a stadium since she was 16 has a setting it can default to in the absence of any other instructions, and the setting was the one I had used for 1,000 starting blocks. I sat. I breathed. I waited. We pulled up to the restaurant. A woman at the front of the restaurant came out to meet us with an envelope. She handed me the envelope. The card inside the envelope was a card from Andre. The card said something to the effect of, "I am sorry I could not be there for your birthday tonight, but I have a present for you out on the lawn." I was a detective. I knew what a card on a tray meant. I closed the envelope. I stood up out of the car. I walked toward the lawn. There was a piece of grass at the back of the resort, with palm trees around it, and a path of candles down the middle, and Andre at the end of the candles holding flowers. He was in a shirt I had never seen before, ironed in a way that made me want to laugh because I knew what his ironing looked like, and his face was the kind of face a man makes when he has been holding his face still for an entire day and is allowed, finally, to look at the woman he is about to ask the question to. I have, in interviews since, called what happened next a blackout. I do not have a word for it that is more honest than that. I walked. I walked toward him. I had in my head 3 things I was thinking, only one of which I now remember. The thing I remember thinking was, "Sydney, do not trip in the heels." I did not trip in the heels. The candles were lit. The palm trees were dark behind him. He was kneeling. I was crying. He said something. I do not remember what he said. I will tell you what was happening underneath what he said. I was 6 years old in a kitchen in Scotch Plains, watching my father tape a number to the floor and put me in lane 4, because lane 4 was the lane nobody else wanted. I was 16 years old in a stadium in Eugene, running a world junior record in the 400-meter hurdles to make a team a girl my age was not supposed to make. I was 22 years old in front of a man I had been talking to on a screen since November of 2020, and the man had a small box in his hand, and the small box had a small ring in it, and the ring was, in some way, I do not know how to fully explain to a stranger reading this book, the lane 4 I had been imagining since I was a child. He asked. I said yes. I said it through whatever crying I was doing. I said it with the videographer behind me. I said it with my friends behind the videographer. I said it with my mother on the phone, because I called her 2 minutes after I said it, and she did the one thing my mother does when something she has been praying for has finally come to pass, which is that she made a small specific noise that is not laughter and is not crying, and is, in our family, the highest form of yes. I called Morgan. Morgan said something I will not put on the page because Morgan said it for me. I called Raquel, and Raquel screamed for the kind of duration only a sister-in-law-to-be can scream, and the screaming was the start of an entire other family showing up in my life. I posted the announcement on Instagram a few days later. I wrote a caption that I have read since and would not have changed. I wrote that I fell more in love with Andre every day off of the strength of his faith, and I called him the most God-fearing, passionate, honest, loving, hard-working, protective, and genuine man I had ever met. I wrote that I saw Jesus in him. I wrote it because it was true, and I wrote it because the world was about to start telling me what kind of marriage I was about to have. And I had decided early that the world was going to be told at the start what kind of marriage I knew I was about to have. Andre, on his own page, posted a single line in response. The line was a verse. The verse was the 8th chapter of the Song of Solomon. The line read, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved?" He had been carrying that line in his head since the drive back to his hotel after our first date. I had been carrying lane 4 in my head since I was 6. We had finally arrived at the same lane. Chapter 9. Sydney, the morning of. About the morning of the wedding. The wedding has, for 9 months, belonged on Andre's page, and the morning of the wedding belongs on mine. I had not slept very well. I had told myself the night before that I was going to sleep the way I sleep before an Olympic final, which is to say carefully and with intent. I had set my alarm for 6:30. I had lined up my morning the way I line up the morning of a race. I had laid out my running shorts for a small loosening jog because I had decided, in the way a hurdler decides, that I was not going to walk down an aisle with the legs of a woman who had not run that morning. I had made a list in my notebook of the people I was going to call between 7 and 9, in the order I needed to call them. The list had been 4 names long: Morgan, Danny, my mother, Andre. I had decided that Andre got the 4 o'clock in the afternoon slot because the rules say you do not see the groom on the morning of the wedding, and I had, in the spirit of the rules, given him the latest call I could justify. I woke up at 5:50. The sky outside the window of the bridal suite at Early Mountain Vineyards was a kind of gray that was not in the early morning, yet a problem. I made coffee. I sat in the chair by the window, and I looked out at the lawn where a great many of the people I love were going to gather in 8 hours. A little of what was on my mind. I had been, the night before, a bride who had been telling herself that everything was going to be exactly the way she had been planning it for 9 months, because the planning had been the thing that had carried her through the months it had taken to plan it. I had built a wedding day in my head. I had built the aisle. I had built the lights. I had built the order of the speeches and the order of the toasts and the way the trees were going to look when the sun went down behind them. I had been in the way every bride is who has had 9 months to think about it, holding the day a little too tightly. The clouds got darker around 7. I watched them from the chair. My mother came in around 7:15. She was already dressed for the morning, which is what she does on important mornings. She had a cup of tea in her hand. She sat down on the chair across from me and looked out at the same sky I had been looking at. She said the radar. She said it the way my mother says the small specific words that are doing the work of bigger sentences. I knew which radar she meant. I had been refreshing the radar on my phone for an hour. The radar had a band of green and yellow about an hour west of us, moving the way storm fronts in central Virginia move on a Friday in May, which is east. The band would, The radar told me, "Be over Madison by 10:30 in the morning." The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. The radar told me the band would not be over Madison at 4. The radar also told me the band would, before it had moved through, drop the kind of rain on the lawn that the lawn would need a few hours to recover from. My mother and I sat for a while. The bridesmaids had not yet arrived. Hair and makeup were not yet here. I had a window of about 40 minutes to be a bride who was not yet performing, and I used most of it sitting in a chair next to my mother, looking at a sky neither of us had ordered. I called Bree at 7:30. Bree had a plan G, because Bree has a plan G for everything. She walked me through plan G in the small, flat voice of a wedding planner who has been on a phone with a bride before sunrise. The ceremony in plan G would move indoors. The lawn would be the cocktail hour, weather permitting, and the cocktail hour would, weather not permitting, also move indoors. The dance floor would shift 2 feet to the right. The bouquets would stay where they were. We had a plan G. The plan G would hold. I hung up. I sat in the chair. I told my mother what Bree had told me. My mother nodded once. She did not, in the way some mothers might have, attempt to give me a speech about how plan G might be better than the original plan. She looked at the sky. She drank her tea. She let me sit with it. I called Andre at 8. I was not supposed to call Andre on the morning of the wedding. The rules say, you do not. I called him anyway. I'd been calling him since November of 2020, and I was not going to walk down an aisle without calling him on the morning that I did. He picked up after 1 ring, which is the way Andre picks up, because Andre picks up. I want to tell you what I sounded like, because I have been embarrassed about it since. I sounded 10 years old. I sounded like a girl, the bride I had been planning to be, the woman who had been on the cover of magazines and on Olympic podiums and in the back seat of a videographer's car in Scottsdale, had, somewhere in the hour between the radar and the phone call, been replaced by a small girl who was about to lose the day she had been planning since she was 6. I told him so. I told him that the day was ruined. I told him that everything was ruined. I cried into the phone. I am not proud of it. The bride I had imagined being on the morning of my wedding had not been the kind of bride who cried into a phone before the bridesmaids arrived. He said the sentence. I have already let him put the sentence on his page. I want to put the sentence on mine, because the sentence belongs to both of us now, and the sentence is the sentence the marriage was about to be built on. He said, Sydney, it is not about the day. It is about the marriage. I wiped my eyes. I breathed in. I sat up a little straighter in the chair. He kept talking, in a voice that was, for the rest of the call, soft and a little slow. The way Andre talks when he is making sure I am hearing him. He said the day is going to be the day God gives us. The marriage is the thing that is starting today. The marriage will outlast the day. He said it twice. He said it once for me to hear it, and once for me to hear myself agreeing with it. He had been doing this since November of 2020, when I needed it. I told him I loved him. I told him I had to go. I hung up. I put the phone on the table next to the chair. My mother had been listening to my half of the conversation. My mother put her hand over my hand on the arm of the chair. My mother said he is a good man, Sydney. She had been saying this since the first time he had flown out for the not-quite business meeting trip. Hair and makeup arrived at 9. The bridesmaids arrived at 9:30. Danny Johnson, who had been at every important morning of my life since I was 13, arrived first with a tray of bagels and the small specific brown sugar she had decided I was going to need. Morgan walked in behind her. Raquel walked in behind Morgan, having driven up with Senior the night before, in a Palace Couture adjacent dress she had picked because it would not, in any photograph, compete with mine. The room got loud. The room got bright. The room became, in the way a bridal suite becomes on the morning of a wedding, the room I had been imagining since I was a girl. The rain started at 10:20, 10 minutes earlier than the radar had told me. The rain did the kind of thing rain does in Central Virginia on a Friday in May, which is to say that it came down hard for 40 minutes and then stopped, and the lawn was not going to be the place we got married, and that was that. The room around me had by then become a room that was no longer worried about the lawn. The women in the room had decided, in the way women decide things at weddings, that the indoor pivot was, in fact, the better pivot. They had decided this the way they decide most things, which is by saying it once and then saying it again, with a little more conviction the second time. By 11, the room around me had agreed it was glad the ceremony was moving inside. By noon, the room around me had agreed the indoor space had probably been the right space all along. I am still not entirely sure which of those agreements was true and which was a kindness. The kindness was probably most of it. I have been grateful for the kindness ever since. My father came in at 1. He had been in the men's room of the venue with his pocket square for an hour. He walked into the bridal suite in a tie I had picked out for him, and the kind of slow, steady step my father has always had, the step of a man who has been timing his children for decades and has, for the first time, been told that today he is the timer of nothing and the walker down of someone. He stood in the doorway. He looked at me. He did not speak for a few seconds, which is the way my father stops himself from saying a sentence he has not yet finished writing in his head. He said, "Sydney." He said, "You look like your mother." He had not, in the 22 years he had been my father, ever said that to me. I will tell you what I felt. I felt, for the second time that morning, the small specific tightening in my chest that says you are about to cry in a way that is not going to be helpful to anybody. I did not cry. The makeup artist had finished my eyes an hour earlier. I had decided not to undo her work. My father offered me his arm. I took it. We walked to the door. The aisle was inside. The aisle was shorter than the aisle on the lawn would have been. The aisle was, in some way I cannot explain to anybody who was not a 6-year-old girl in a kitchen in Scotch Plains, the aisle. The bridesmaids were at the front of the line. Morgan was at the head of them. Raquel was behind Morgan. Danny was behind Raquel. The doors at the end of the room were closed. The doors opened. I walked. I walked in lane 4. I walked toward Andre. The day was not the day. The marriage was the thing that was starting. He had been right all along. Chapter 10. Andre, Madison, May, rain. We got married on the 6th of May, 2022, at Early Mountain Vineyards in Madison, Virginia. A few things about that day. First, the rain. It was not supposed to rain. We had been planning the day for 9 months. We had been planning it with 2 women named Bree and Cara of Amore Events Company, the kind of professionals who do not believe in surprises, and who had built a timeline of the day that was, by the morning of the wedding, the kind of timeline that NASA might have envied. The timeline included an outdoor ceremony. The timeline included a long aisle through trees. The timeline included a moment At the end of the ceremony, when Sydney and I would walk back through the trees together with 1,000 small lights coming on around us as the sky did the kind of blue into purple Virginia skies do in the first week of May. The sky on the morning of the 6th of May did not read the timeline. I was at the hotel. I was in a suit. I was not yet in the jacket. I was reading my Bible because I had decided about a year earlier that I was going to begin every important day of my life by reading my Bible for 10 minutes before I did anything else, and the wedding day qualified. I was in Psalm 16. There is a verse in Psalm 16 that goes, "The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance." I had underlined the verse the night before. My phone rang at 8. My wife has already told you about the call from her side. Here is what was happening on mine. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the suit pants I had not yet finished buttoning, and I listened to the voice of a woman who had been planning her wedding day since she was 6 years old in a kitchen in Scotch Plains. And I said the only sentence I could honestly say. I said the sentence I have already let her give to you. I will not repeat it on my page. I had been preparing to say a sentence like that for 30 years. The 30 years had been senior at the door of the church in Olney. The sentence was, in a way I could not have explained at the moment but understood the second I had said it, my father's sentence in my own mouth, given to my own wife, on the morning she would no longer be the same Sydney she had been. She breathed. She said, "Okay." She said, "I love you." She said she had to go. She hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for another minute. I finished buttoning the suit pants. I knelt next to the bed. I prayed the only short prayer a man like me ever knows how to make. I said, "Lord, help me say the right thing today. If I cannot say the right thing, help me to not say the wrong thing." I stood up. I went and got my jacket out of the closet. The team moved the ceremony indoors. Bree and Kara, who had been planning for 8 different versions of the day for 9 months, had a Plan G. Plan G turned out to be the version of the day God had been planning the whole time. The space we ended up using was a smaller room than the lawn. The candles were closer. The greenery on the mantel was draped in a way that the wind would not have allowed it to be draped outdoors. The aisle was shorter, but the aisle was, in some inexplicable way, more clearly the aisle Sydney had been imagining as a 6-year-old in a kitchen in Scotch Plains. The aisle was hers. There was no number painted on it, but there did not need to be. She knew which lane she was in. I want to tell you what I remember about standing at the front of the room. I had a Brian Alexander suit on. I had a pair of Salvatore Ferragamo shoes on. I had the small ring in my left jacket pocket. I had, behind me, a row of men I had played football with at 3 different stops in 3 different states. I had, in front of me, the doors at the back of the room, which were closed. I had Senior at the side of the room, with his hands folded the way I had watched him fold them at the door of our Baptist church in Olney for 30 years, watching the parking lot. He was watching the door. The doors opened. Sydney was in the doorway in a Palace couture gown with a Vera Wang veil and a pair of Jimmy Choo heels, and her father had her arm. I am going to spare you a description of the dress. I will tell you that I have since looked at photographs of my wife on the day that I married her, and the dress is exactly the dress she imagined, and exactly the bouquet she imagined, and exactly the lane she imagined, and that her father, to whom she looked in the eye one time before she let go of his elbow, did the small, slow nod that he has done at every important moment of every one of his children's lives. He had been there. He had been there since the kitchen. She walked to me. We held hands. We did the things you do at a wedding. The pastor said the things he had been preparing to say. We said the vows we had been preparing to say. He pronounced us. I kissed my wife. Here is the small thing I remember about the kiss. The room had been quiet during the vows. The room got loud at the kiss. There were a great many people in the room who had loved Sydney since she was a child, and who had loved me since I was a child. And the loud was, more than anything else, the sound of a great many of those people exhaling at the same time. We had been a planned couple. We had been a publicly planned couple. We had, in the eyes of the people who loved us, been ours to be for a long time before we were finally ours. The exhale was a real exhale. It was the sound of a community letting us go from a watchful posture into a married posture. We did the reception. We did the cake, vanilla with honey buttercream and fresh strawberries, which Sydney, against her own protest, helped me cut and ate more cream cheese off of than she will ever admit on a podcast. We did the first dance. I had practiced the first dance for 2 months in our living room. I had asked Sydney 3 times whether I was getting better. I had been told 3 times that the answer was getting there. I do not consider myself a dancer. I held my wife with both hands and we moved more or less in time with the song. The song while it was playing was not a metaphor. The song on the page of this book is. The dance did not have to be good. The dance had to be us. A great many people came up to us, both at the reception and in the days afterward, to tell us that they had felt the presence of God in the room. I do not always know what to do with that sentence when somebody else says it about a room I was in. I will tell you that the room was not unusual. The room was lit. The room was soft. The room had a great many people in it who were doing the small work that married couples do at the weddings of friends, which is to remember their own vows and renew them quietly, and to watch a young couple at the front of the room and pray for the years that young couple does not yet know it is going to need. The day was not, in the end, the day we had planned. The day was the day we had been given. I have learned since that those are the only days a man has to work with anyway. The night ended. We left in a car. The candles were lit on the steps as we left. Senior was at the door, hands folded, watching the parking lot. He was watching us. He said one sentence as I walked past him. He said again, "Be there, son. I have been trying." Chapter 11. Sydney, the wind beneath her wings. A few weeks before the wedding, my friend Danny Johnson hosted my bridal shower at a venue not far from my parents' place in New Jersey. Danny had been planning the shower for months. She had built a guest list that included, in one room, every woman who had been a part of my life from the time I was 6 years old in a kitchen in Scotch Plains to the time I was 22 years old standing in front of a videographer in a hotel suite in Scottsdale. There were teachers in the room. There were teammates in the room. There were aunts and second cousins, and the mother of a friend of mine from Union Catholic, all of whom had, at one point or another, fed me a sandwich. Danny had also, without telling me, arranged for a surprise guest. The surprise guest was Andre. The surprise guest's father was Andre. Picture me looking up from the chair I had been sitting in at the front of the room and see Senior in a polo shirt walking through the door first. The room got quiet for a second. The women in the room had heard about Senior. They had been told the stories about Senior. They had, in some sense, been waiting for the day Senior would walk through a door of a room they were also in. He filled the door frame the way he fills door frames. Andre was behind him, grinning, holding a small store-bought gift that he had clearly bought at the front desk of the hotel that morning. Senior, when he reached me, leaned down and gave me a hug. The hug was a hug a man of his temperament gives, brief and complete. He said one sentence to me. He said, "We are real proud of you, Sydney." He moved aside for his son. Andre kissed my forehead. I started crying for the first of 3 times I would cry that afternoon. Now my mother's speech. My mother is Mary Neumeister McLaughlin. I've already told you who she was as a runner. I want to tell you who she is as a mother of 4. She is a woman who, when she is going to say something important, will go silent in the kitchen for an hour before she says it. And the silence will not be a sad silence, and you will know, if you are her daughter, that something is being prepared. She had been silent in the kitchen for an hour the morning of the shower. She had a piece of paper in her hand when she stood up. She thanked the women in the room. She thanked Danny for hosting. She told a story about a meet I had run when I was 8 years old, in which I had, against the advice of every adult present, demanded to run in a heat with girls who were 2 years older than I was, and had, in the way I have always been since, finished second only because I had given everything I had on the inside of the 3rd turn and not had enough left for the straight. She said the story explained me. I am going to take her word for it. She turned the speech to Andre. She had not met him in person until shortly before the engagement. She had only seen him on the screen for the better part of a year and a half. She had asked me, on a phone call somewhere in the middle of those 9 months, the same question every mother asks her daughter eventually. She had asked, "Does he make you better?" I had said yes. She had not asked another question for the rest of that phone call. She had taken the answer the way she takes important answers, which is by writing them down somewhere in her own head and then waiting to see whether the answer holds. The answer had held. She said so to the room. She said that she had been raised understanding the lanes were not always going to be the lanes she wanted, and that she had been determined, when she had her own children, to raise daughters who would not grow up that way. She said the lanes, for me, had not always been easy. She said the world had at times been a hard world, and that there had been, in the year of my senior year of high school, weeks she had not known how to mother me through. She said she had asked the Lord, in those weeks, to put a person in my life who would help me to grow into the woman she had been praying for me to become. She said she had been asking that prayer for years before the prayer was answered. She said then, the line that the women in the room were waiting for, and that I have not been able to write about anywhere since without crying. She said, "What mother wouldn't want her daughter to find the person that helps them to soar?" She said, "Andre, you are the wind beneath her wings." She said it to him, sitting on a small chair near the kitchen, in a room of women who had been waiting 22 years to hear it. He nodded once. He did not speak. Senior, beside him, did not speak either. The room exhaled. I cried in a chair. I will not pretend I cried with grace. I cried with my hand over my mouth, the way a woman cries who is trying to keep the cry to herself and failing. And Morgan, who had been sitting next to me, put her hand on my back and held it there until I had finished. Morgan and I had grown up sharing a bathroom and trading clothes. Morgan, in that moment, was the only person in the room I would have allowed to put a hand on my back. I had not asked. She had known. That is what older sisters are for. A small private thing I said to Morgan in the parking lot of the venue at the end of the night. Because the moment is mine, and I am giving it to you. I told her I was about to be a wife, and that I did not, on the inside, fully feel like a wife yet. I told her I was scared of the part where the lanes change. I told her I did not know what to do with the part where the woman I had been was about to be a person I had not yet met. Morgan did the thing Morgan does, which is that she did not give me an answer. She asked me a question. She asked me what the woman I had not yet met would say to the woman I had been if the two of them were standing in the parking lot. I told her I did not know. She told me that the woman I had not yet met would tell the woman I had been to keep walking. She would tell her, Morgan said, that she had been doing fine. She would tell her, Morgan said, that the lanes were going to change because they were supposed to. I leaned my head on Morgan's shoulder. I cried for the second time that day. The car pulled up. Andre was driving. He had taken Senior back to the hotel and come back for me the way Andre comes back for me, which is by being where he said he was going to be when he said he was going to be there. I got in. I rested my head on the window. He drove me home. I had been a daughter. I'd been a sister. I'd been a friend. I would, in a few weeks, be a wife. The lanes were changing. I was, against everything I had been afraid of in the parking lot, ready for them to change. Part 4. Together. Chapter 12. Andre, Grace Community, Greek Paradigms, a sourdough starter. We moved to California after the wedding. Imagine waking up next to my wife every morning instead of waking up across a country from her. I had not done it before. I had been engaged. I had been, in some sense, already a husband for 9 months on paper. I had not been a husband in the sense that a husband is the man whose first sight of a day is the woman he is about to spend the day with. The first time I rolled over in our new bed in Los Angeles, 2 days after we had gotten back from a few quiet days near the Virginia mountains, and saw her hair on the pillow next to me, I lay there with my hand under my head for a few minutes, and I did the thing I had been doing in the prayer journal for 2 years. I prayed, Lord, prepare me to be the man you are preparing for the woman you are preparing for me. The prayer was, by then, retrospective. The man had been prepared. The woman was already there. The work, the prayer was reminding me, was now to keep being the man. The work, the prayer was reminding me, was the doing of it. I started at the Master's Seminary that fall. I'd been thinking about seminary for years. I'd been thinking about it in the way a man thinks about a thing he is being walked toward by a series of small, slow conversations with elders he respects, and the men in question had affirmed the next step. I had applied. I had been accepted. I was beginning a Master of Divinity that was, by the catalog page, going to take me 4 years to complete, and by my own honest read of myself, more like 5. I had been a wide receiver. I had not been an academic. I had not been a man who spent 5 hours a day with a Greek paradigm chart. I was about to become one. The chart was on my kitchen counter that fall. I would put it there at 5 in the morning with a cup of coffee, and I would conjugate a Greek verb until I could conjugate it without the chart, and then I would conjugate the next verb. My wife, who is an Olympic gold medalist, would walk through the kitchen at 5:30 in her training clothes, on her way to the track, and she would stop and look at the chart, and she would shake her head, and she would smile, and she would walk out the door. I had been a man being chased by participles. She had been a woman being chased by hurdles. We were two athletes of different disciplines, living the same sentence in two different languages. We joined Grace Community Church. I am going to tell you who was in the pulpit at Grace Community Church in those days, because the man in the pulpit is part of why my wife carries the Bible she carries. The man in the pulpit was John MacArthur. He had been in the pulpit at Grace for 54 years. He was, by the time we joined, an old man with a gentle voice and a steady cadence, and he preached the way men with that kind of cadence preach, which is sentence by sentence. We did not choose Grace because of him. We chose Grace because the word was being preached there. The man in the pulpit was a gift on top. We sat in the same pew most Sundays. My wife, for the first 6 months we were members, took notes on a small pad in her lap with the kind of attention I had never seen her bring to a sermon before. I do not believe I have ever loved her more than I loved her in those Sundays. By my second year, I had started teaching at Grace on campus, the church's college ministry over at UCLA. We met on Wednesday nights. There were 30-some students in the room my first night, and the room was a small, bare room a church on campus group meets in on a Wednesday night, with folding chairs and a whiteboard, and a kid in the back rolling a basketball under his foot, while another kid in the front asked me a question about the doctrine of justification. I had, that first night, the same feeling I had had on the 50-yard line at UVA after games. The feeling was that I had been given an antenna. The antenna was beginning to pick up signals. The signals were the lives of a few young men and women who were further along than I had been at their age, and a few who were behind, and most who were exactly where I had been. I had been there. I was there. I was beginning to understand, in a new room, what Senior had been telling me at the door of the church for 30 years. I will tell you about the sourdough starter, because the sourdough starter has earned its place. Sydney decided, the spring of our second year, that she wanted to bake. Sydney has a number of small private hobbies that the public does not necessarily know about, and one of them is that she likes to bake. She had been making cookies since she was 12 years old, and she had, by the spring of our second year, decided that the next frontier was bread. The next frontier required, my wife informed me, a starter. A starter is a small jar of flour and water that you keep in the kitchen and feed every day. The starter is alive. The starter is, in the way that yeast is alive, a thing you have to take care of. We named the starter. I will not give you the name because the name is for us. The name is for us because the starter and the name and the daily small ritual of feeding it became, in our second year of marriage, the kind of small, daily, small thing two people who are tired at the end of a long day can do together that does not require them to perform for each other. We forgot to feed the starter at some point that spring. I am not going to tell you whose fault it was. We came home one night from a long day, and Sydney walked into the kitchen, and she stopped in front of the jar, and she said, in the voice my wife has when something she has been responsible for has been let down, babe. I came in and looked at the jar. The starter was thin and pale on the surface in a way that meant it was hungry. We fed it. We watched it for the next 3 days. It came back. The starter had not been judging us. The starter was not a metaphor for our marriage. I am going to put it on the page as a metaphor for our marriage anyway, because the metaphor is the kind of metaphor only a man who is too tired to write his next paper for seminary class will reach for. The starter taught us, in 3 days of attention, that the things we were responsible for would notice and would respond when we gave them the small daily attention they needed. We did not always give it. The starter was forgiving. The marriage was, by the grace of God, also forgiving, although the marriage would, before our second year ended, ask us a harder version of the same question. Now a kitchen dance. I have heard in recent years that a great many couples have a kitchen dance, and I will tell you that ours is not particularly impressive. We were in our kitchen one night, in May or June, with the starter in a jar on the counter and a song playing on a small speaker in the corner, and Sydney, who had been doing the dishes, turned around and put her arms up in the half-mocking way she has when she wants me to dance with her without admitting she wants me to dance with her. I dried my hands. I put my arms around her. We did a small, slow turn in front of the starter and the speaker and the lit window and the bowl that still had cake batter in it from a thing she had been baking earlier in the day. I stepped on her foot once. I always step on her foot once. She laughed. We kept moving. I started to notice in those months that I was reading more than I was looking at her. I did not notice it for as long as I should have. The chart on the counter was getting bigger. The hours I was spending at the desk were getting longer. The Wednesday night at Grace on campus was a real ministry, but a real ministry costs a real evening every week. I was, in the language a Marine's son uses when he wants to give himself an honest accounting, beginning to drift off the line. I had, in the slow accumulation of the 8 or 10 months I had been a seminary student, started to do the thing I had spent 30 years watching other men do, which was to be technically present and not actually there. My wife noticed first. My wife always notices first. The conversation she was about to ask of me was coming, and I did not yet know it was coming. And the thing I am still grateful for is that she had the courage to ask it. The starter kept rising in the jar. The chart on the counter kept getting bigger. The wife at the dishes kept watching. She was about to say something. Chapter 13. Sydney, let your body do what it wants to do. What is in my bag the night before a final? Because I am about to tell you about the kind of training a person does to be ready for that morning. And the kind of training a person does to be ready for that morning is, in the end, only useful to the kind of woman who is also pulling a small stack of Uno cards out of her bag the night before. Because the small stack of Uno cards is, in our family, a tradition. I bring Uno cards to track meets. I have brought Uno cards to track meets since I was 13 years old. I have brought Uno cards to dinners with sponsors I had only just met. I have brought Uno cards to business meetings my agent had been putting on the calendar for a month. I have brought Uno cards to the Four Seasons in Scottsdale. I am bringing Uno cards to the maternity ward in 7 months. I am a Uno player who will save a draw 4 for the back half of the deck because I want the table to lose its composure. I do not stack the draw 2s. I do not believe stacking is appropriate. I am, depending on the night, a forgiving player or a ruthless player, and the determining factor is who I have been told in the half hour before we sat down at the table was confident in their game. The confident ones lose. I want you to know that about me before I tell you about the work. The other thing in my bag the night before a final is a small zippered pouch of gummy bears. The gummy bears are not a metaphor. The gummy bears are gummy bears. I have been eating gummy bears the night before a race since I was 16 years old, and I have been eating gummy bears the night before a race over the considered objections of every nutritionist I have ever worked with. The nutritionists have a clipboard and a chart and a list of foods they would prefer I had instead. I have a small zippered pouch with about a dozen of the red ones in it, because the red ones are my favorite, and I have a working theory, which I am not asking the reader to share, that the red ones give me superpowers. The superpowers, on the night I am eating them, are the only superpowers I am asking for. I also bring my Bible. I bring the small one. The small one fits in any bag, and I have been carrying it for a few years now. Since the day at Grace Community Church, I asked Andre, after a sermon, where I could buy the smaller version of the John MacArthur Study Bible, the larger version of which had been in my purse for so long, my purse had given up on holding any other book, about a text message my coach sent me, because the text message is the closest thing I have ever received to a psalm. My coach is Bobby Kersey. He has been in the sport for 40-some years. He has been to 12 Olympic Games. He has at least one gold medal in all of them. He is the kind of coach whose office, when you walk in, contains both an Olympic ring and a small printout of a verse from Hebrews 12 that he has had on the wall for longer than most of his current athletes have been alive. He had inherited me at the start of 2020, right around the time the world stopped, and he had, over the course of the next 2 years, taught me the 400-meter hurdles in a way I had not been taught it before. He had also, the spring of an Olympic year, sent me a single text message that he wanted me to read on the morning of a race. The message read, "Let your body do what it wants to do." The message read, "Let your body do what it wants to do." The message read, "Let your body do what it wants to do." He had pasted the sentence into the message 50 times in a row. The sentence took up the whole screen. I had to scroll on my phone to get to the end of the message. I had not, before that morning, ever received a text message from a coach that took up the whole screen. I scrolled through the 50 repetitions on the morning of the trials in my hotel room while I was lacing my shoes. I want to give you the science. Bobby will not mind. The 400-meter hurdles for a long time was a race that everyone believed was best run in 15 strides between hurdles. 15 strides was the standard. 15 strides kept you on the same lead leg over every hurdle, which kept your form the same, which kept your speed the same. 15 strides was orthodoxy. Bobby, watching me practice in the spring of the Olympic year, had noticed that my body did not want to take 15 strides. My body, when I let it, wanted to take 14. 14 was a stride pattern that nobody but a small handful of male hurdlers had ever sustained for an entire race. He had texted me the sentence 50 times because he was trying to tell me, in a way I would believe, that I was supposed to do the thing my body had been wanting to do. I ran 14s to hurdle 5 at the trials. I ran 51.90. I broke the world record by 26 hundredths of a second. I was 21 years old. I ran 14s to hurdle 7 a few weeks later in Tokyo. I ran 51.46. I broke my own world record by another 44 hundredths of a second. I was on a podium with a gold medal around my neck. The gold medal was for an event that at that point in my life I had been told my whole career was the wrong event for me to be running. About the year between Tokyo and Budapest, because the year my body did the thing my body did not want to do. I ran a 50.68 at the World Championships in Eugene, Oregon in 2022. The 50.68 broke my world record again. The 50.68 was, on the broadcast, the kind of run that announcers run out of words for. The 50.68 was, in my body, the kind of run that hurts. Let me be honest about hurt. The hurt I am talking about was not the hurt of a sore muscle. The hurt I am talking about was the hurt of a body that has gone past what it has ever asked of itself. The hurt I am talking about lives in the place a runner goes to find the next gear, and the next gear costs you. I had paid the price the night of the 50.68. I had been afraid for the next 2 years of paying it again. Here is what I learned. I learned that the gift the Lord has given me is not always going to be easy to use. I had been raised by parents who knew better than to overwhelm me in the gentle restraint of a 6-year-old's first meet, and I had grown up to be the kind of woman who, by 23, was running the kind of race that demands of a body what the kind of race I was running demands. I could not run that race in the gentle restraint of a 6-year-old. I had to run it in the willingness of a 23-year-old who had decided that the gift God had given her was, even when it hurt, worth using. I told Bobby on the 23rd of April of an Olympic year that I had been afraid. I had texted him. I had said, "Bobby, I think I have been cheating myself ever since Oregon. I think I have been afraid of going back to that place." He had texted back. The text was, like the 50 times text, short. He had said, "Sydney, sometimes the Lord is asking your body to go where your mind does not want to take it. Trust the body. Your body knows. Your body has been listening. I do not know how a man gets to be Bobby Kersey in this life. I know that I am grateful, every Olympic cycle, that I am one of the women in his lane. Now, Budapest. I had run, the August of 2023, the 400-meter hurdles at the World Championships. I had run 51.41. I will spare you the exact splits. I will tell you what happened when I came off the track. Andre had flown out for that race. I had not asked him to. He had, against the pattern he and I were just then beginning to develop, decided to come. I crossed the line. I bent at the waist. I caught my breath. I started to walk back to the camera bay where the broadcasters wanted me. Andre was at the rail. He leaned over the rail. I came up to him. He started to lean down to kiss me. I stopped him. I told him a sentence I have not been able to say since without crying. I told him, "Babe, I did not even run that race. God carried me around the track." He looked at me. He nodded once. He let me go to the camera bay. He did not say anything else for 10 minutes, because the look in my eyes had told him to let me have the silence, and he is, more than any other man I have ever met, a man who will let a woman have the silence. Here is what I had felt on the track. I had felt, between hurdle 5 and hurdle 7, a hand on the small of my back. I do not know how to describe that to a person who has not had something like it happen to them. I am not a woman who is in the habit of describing her own spirituality in mystical terms. I have been raised inside a tradition of Catholicism on my side and Baptist seriousness on my husband's, and we are not, the two of us, the kinds of Christians who reach for mystical language when plain language will do. I will only tell you that I had been about to slow down between hurdle 5 and hurdle 6, and a hand had been on the small of my back, and the hand had pushed me through to the next hurdle, and the hand had pushed me to the hurdle after that, and the hand had been there until the line. I had not put it there. I had not asked for it. I had not earned it. I had not been promised it. It had been there. I came home to Andre that night. He had cooked dinner. He had also burned dinner. I want you to know that he had genuinely tried. We ate cereal at the kitchen counter. The starter was on the counter. The starter was rising. We did not talk about the race. We talked about the fact that he had bought the wrong cereal, which was, in the language of our marriage, a more comforting thing to talk about than the thing I had felt on the track. I had his attention. I had it on the track. I had it in the kitchen. I had started, in my second year of marriage, to suspect that the part of my life that was about to be the hardest part of my life was the part of my life I was sharing with another person. The starter rose. The chart on the counter got bigger. The man in the kitchen got quieter. He was about to say something, and I was about to be the one who asked him to. Chapter 14. Andre. Parallel is not together. We were 2 years into the marriage. We were 1 year out of the worst version of ourselves, and 1 year before the version of ourselves I am writing this book about. Picture us in a kitchen. The kitchen is where the conversation happened, and I want to put the conversation on the page the way a kitchen table conversation goes, which is in pieces. It was a Tuesday. We had been home for an hour. I had Greek flashcards on the table in front of me. My wife was sitting across from me in a hoodie I had bought her in our first year, with her phone in her hand. She was scrolling. She had a glass of water on the table. The water had been there for 30 minutes. The starter was on the counter behind me, in the jar. The light over the kitchen sink was on. The rest of the house was dim. She put the phone down. She did not slam the phone down. She put it down, the way a woman puts a phone down when she has decided to say a sentence. She looked at me. I looked up from the flashcards. She breathed in. She breathed out. She said the sentence. She said, "Babe, I love you. I have not seen you in 3 months, and we have been in this house every night." Here is what I felt before I tell you what I said. I felt the room narrow. I felt, in my chest, the same small, specific tightening I had felt when I had been in the hospital bed at UVA at 20 years old, and the team chaplain had handed me Romans and asked me to read Romans 8. I felt in my throat the urge to explain myself. I felt the seminary vocabulary rise in my mouth like a debate team reflex. I felt the words we should think about this in terms of our respective callings arrive in my head. I felt them arrive, and I did not say them, because the sentence I had already heard from my wife was the kind of sentence a husband does not get to answer with seminary vocabulary. The sentence had not asked for vocabulary. The sentence had asked for me. I closed the laptop. I put the flashcards face down on the table. I did the thing I had been raised to do at the door of a Baptist church on a Sunday morning, which was to go quiet and make sure I was, in fact, watching what I was supposed to be watching. I said, "Tell me what you have been seeing." She told me. She did not yell. She did not cry. She told me, in the small, flat voice my wife uses when she has been thinking about a conversation for 2 weeks before she has it, that she had been watching me become a man who was technically present in our marriage and not actually there. She told me that she had been watching me at dinner with my Bible at my elbow. She told me that she had been watching me at breakfast with a Greek paradigm chart on the place where her cup of coffee was supposed to be. She told me that she had been watching me on Wednesday nights at Grace on campus and on Saturday afternoons in the back room, and that she had been telling herself the whole time that she was the one who needed to be more patient because I was studying the Word, and the Word was a worthy thing to study, and what kind of wife begrudges her husband his Greek paradigms? She said, "Andre, the Word is not the man. I married the man." Here is what I heard underneath what she said. I heard Senior, 20 years earlier, in the lobby of our church on a Sunday morning, with his hands folded watching the parking lot. I heard him say to me, the way he had said it to me 1,000 times since, "You don't have to be loud, son. You have to be there." I had not been loud. I had also not been there. I had been on a stool at a kitchen counter with a Greek paradigm chart in front of me, treating my marriage like a day I would get to, eventually. I had been treating my marriage in the language of my wedding day, like the day. I had not been treating it like the marriage. The day was not the thing. The marriage was the thing. I sat there. I did not say anything for a while. My wife did not push me. She knew by then that pushing me was not the move. She knew by then that the man across from her had been raised by a man who would, in a hard moment, go quiet and gather himself before he spoke, and that the gathering was the prayer. I gathered myself. I prayed, in the back of my head, the only short prayer a man like me ever knows how to make. "Lord, help me say the right thing. If I cannot say the right thing, help me to not say the wrong thing." I said the right thing. I do not always. Here is what I said. I said, "Sydney, you are right. I have been studying about love. I have not been doing it. I am sorry. I want to fix it. I want to start tonight." She reached across the table. She put her hand on the back of my hand. She had small, specific tears in her eyes, the kind that do not fall, the kind a woman cries when she has been waiting to be heard and has finally been heard. She said, "Okay." She said, "I want to start tonight too." We sat there for a while. We prayed. I will not give you the prayer. The prayer was, in the way prayers are when the prayer is also a confession, a conversation. We did not fix our marriage in one night. The chapter does not pretend we did. We had to go back to the Bible studies we had done over FaceTime in November of 2020, when the Bible study had been the way we got to know each other, and we had to do them in the same room. We had to put the Greek paradigm chart in a drawer for a couple of weeks. We had to redo the calendar. We had to, in the language a marine son uses, take the post and stand it. The night had a small redemptive beat. After the prayer, I closed the laptop. I put the flashcards in the drawer. I sat down on the couch in the living room, where my wife was already curled up under a blanket, with her phone face down on the coffee table. I sat down next to her. I did not study. I did not read. I did not open my phone. I sat. I put my arm around her. She rested her head on my shoulder. The starter rose in the jar in the kitchen. The light over the sink stayed on. The house got dim around us, the way a house gets dim around a couple who has finally remembered after a stretch of not remembering what a couple is for. My wife noticed first. My wife always notices first. The thing I will give myself credit for in the long retrospect of our marriage is that the night she noticed, I listened. The night she noticed, I closed the laptop. The night she noticed, I sat down next to her on the couch, and I did not study, and I was, for the first time in a few months, there. Senior would have approved. The marriage held. We went to bed. We woke up. The next day was harder than the night had been, because the next day was the part where the words have to become the thing. We made the next day work. We made the day after that work. We made a couple of weeks of days' work, and then we made a couple of months of days' work. And by the time the Olympic year was the year we were inside of, my wife was running the kind of race she was about to run in Paris, with a husband who was, finally, in the same kitchen with her. The kitchen had a light over the sink. The light over the sink stayed on. Chapter 15. Sydney, Paris. A small public truth I have not always been comfortable putting on the page. My husband does not come to most of my races. He prays the day before and texts me the morning of and watches at home where he can fall apart in private. He has come to a handful. He has missed a great many. The pattern is ours. The pattern is one we worked out in the second year of our marriage. In the kitchen table conversation I have already let him tell you about. The pattern is not a defect. The pattern is the way we have decided between the two of us to manage the specific weight of the kind of public moment a man and a woman in our position have to learn to manage. Here is why he came to Paris. He came to Paris because the night before I left for Paris, in our kitchen, with the starter on the counter, he put his hand on my arm and he said, "I am coming." He said it the way Andre Levrone Jr. says things he has decided, which is once, and without looking up from what he is doing, because the saying is the deciding. I had not asked. He had, in the small, slow way the marriage had been teaching us in the year since the Greek paradigm conversation, been listening for whether the day was the day. He had decided it was. I had said, "Thank you." The morning of the 400-meter hurdles final, he was in our hotel room. He had worship music playing on a small speaker on the bathroom counter. He was pacing the kind of slow pace a marine son paces when he is praying without his hands moving. He came out of the bathroom and stood at the foot of the bed. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I had my hair pulled back. I had my All for God necklace around my neck, the one I had bought before the Olympic trials a few years earlier, the necklace I had been wearing for every race I had run since. He put his hand on my shoulder. He prayed over me. "I will not give you the whole prayer. I will give you the last sentence." He said, "Sydney, God's got you." He said it the way he says it. He kissed the top of my head. I stood up. I walked out of the room. I walked into the same lane I had been walking in since I was 6 years old, in a kitchen in Scotch Plains. Let me put the race in the language I have for it, which is the language of a hurdler. I am going to ask the non-fan to stay with me for 2 paragraphs, because the race is the part of the book the non-fan came for. The starting block, in lane 7, where I had drawn that night. I had, at that point in my career, run from any lane I had been given. The lane in my head was lane 4. The lane in my body was the same lane no matter what number was painted on it. I crouched into the block. I prayed the last words a track athlete prays. The words were, "Lord, carry me. Thank you." The gun went off. I came out of the block in a stride pattern that was, by the time I got to hurdle 1, the stride pattern Bobby and I had been working on for 4 years. I was on 14s. I held 14s through hurdle 5. I held 14s through hurdle 7. I came over hurdle 7 and I felt, in the way I felt it in Budapest, the hand on the small of my back. I will not pretend I always feel it. I felt it that night. It pushed me through hurdle 8 and over hurdle 9. I came off hurdle 10 and I had a straightaway in front of me, and the women in my race were behind me, and the line was where the line was, and I crossed the line. The clock said 50.37. I had broken my own world record again. The 50.37 was the kind of time the people who knew the sport were going to say was the kind of time that would not be touched for a generation. The 50.37 was, in my body, a number I had not been sure on the morning of the race that I was going to be allowed to run. The Lord had allowed me to run it. I was going to be a woman who had run it for the rest of my life. I came off the line. I bent at the waist. I caught my breath. I said, "Thank you, God," the way I always say it, which is into the track, with my hand on my knee. Here is what was happening in the stands. NBC had clipped a microphone to my husband's collar before the race. They do this sometimes for the family members of athletes whose families are part of the story. They had asked him before the gun why he was nervous. They had told him on camera that I always win. He had said on camera that nothing is guaranteed. He had said it the way he says things, which is dry and short, and Maryland Baptist, and Marine Sun. The clip would, the next morning, be the kind of clip that people who love sports husbands would re-share. I have watched the clip a few times since. I will tell you what was inside the silence between the question and the answer. The silence was senior, and the lobby of the church in Olney, and the door of the church, and the parking lot, and the sentence Andre had been carrying for 30 years. The sentence was, "You don't have to be loud. You have to be there." He was there. Now the crown. Raquel had had the idea a year earlier in the kitchen of my parents' house in Scotch Plains on a Sunday afternoon when she had been visiting. She had said, in the way Raquel says things, "Sydney, if you win in Paris, I'm going to put a crown on your head. I'm going to find one. I'm going to make it work. You are going to wear it." I had laughed. I had told her she was being ridiculous. I had not, in any specific way, given her permission. Raquel does not need permission. Raquel had ordered a crown. Raquel had carried the crown to Paris in a box in her carry-on. Raquel had been waiting at the side of the track, just out of view of the camera, the entire race. The first thing I saw when I walked off the track was Raquel, with a small dark velvet box in her hand, in a sundress. She put the crown on my head. I will tell you what I said. I said, "Raquel, are you serious right now?" She said, "Sister, sit still." She fixed the crown on my head. She stepped back. The camera caught it. The photograph would, in the days that followed, be one of the photographs that the New Balance team would use in an ad campaign. I am not going to pretend that I was not flattered by that. I was flattered by that. I am also going to tell you the truer thing, which is that the crown was, in my body, a small specific moment of a sister-in-law I had not yet known when I was 22, showing up to put a thing on the head of a woman who had become, in 3 years of marriage, a sister. That night, in the hotel suite, Andre took my hand in the kitchen of the suite, where he had been making me toast. He pulled me to him. We did the same dance we had done at our wedding, which is a small, slow turn that's more or less in time with no music in particular, and he stepped on my foot once, because he always does. He kissed the top of my head. He said, "Same dance, Mrs. Levrone. Same clumsy man, new crown." I leaned my head against his chest. I said the sentence I had been writing in my head since hurdle 7. I will not put the sentence on the page yet, because the sentence is for the next chapter. I will only tell you that I said it into his ear. He stopped breathing for a second. He pulled back. He looked at me. He had the face of a man who has just been told a thing the man does not yet know how to hold. He held me anyway. We went back to dancing. Chapter 16. Andre, the pre-classic, from the couch. Picture a Saturday afternoon in the spring after Paris, because the Saturday afternoon is the closest thing I have to a sequel to the kitchen table conversation a year and a half earlier, and the closest thing I have to a preview of the Saturday morning that is coming. The Prefontaine Classic was on the broadcast that day. The 400 meters was scheduled for the second hour. My wife, who is the reigning world champion in the 400 meters and the reigning Olympic champion in the 400-meter hurdles, would, in any other spring of her life, have been on the start line. She was, instead, on our couch in Los Angeles, with a baby in her body the size of a strawberry, watching the sport she had taught the rest of the sport how to run. We had a few friends coming over to watch. We had not told them. We had, to be more precise, not told them yet. The thing that was inside of my wife, which we were a few months into knowing about, was the kind of thing that the public was not going to be told about until we had decided how. We had not decided how. We had decided to give it another few weeks. We had also decided, for the day of the broadcast, to keep the decision to ourselves, because the friends in our living room were going to be a great many of the same friends who had been in the living room for the 400-meter hurdles in Paris a couple of years earlier, and our friends had a way of putting two and two together when they were given more than 2 minutes alone with us. Sydney was on the couch. She had a blanket. She had ginger tea. She had her hair up in a bun she does when she has not done it for the camera and is doing it for herself. She was a few months in, what the doctor had called visibly beginning to be visible. The doctor's exact words had been a little gentler than that and a little less amused, but the meaning had been the same. Sydney's body had been the body of a sprinter for 16 years, and the body of a sprinter does not have a great deal of place to hide a baby. She was, by the time the friends began to ring the doorbell, already wearing a loose sweatshirt that says, to a stranger, that the woman in it has been having a long week, and that says, to a friend who has been paying attention, something else. I greeted the door. I poured drinks. I made a tray of the small things you set out on a coffee table when you have 10 people coming over on a Saturday afternoon to watch a race your wife is not in. There were chips. There were some olives. There was a pot of soup on the stove that Sydney had been making for the second day in a row, because the second day in a row was the day we had decided was going to be the soup and watch party day, and Sydney is a planner. I had asked her, at one point, whether she wanted me to take over the soup. She had told me no. She had told me, in her dry, small way, that the soup was the only thing in the kitchen that day she could control, and that she was going to control it. The soup was excellent. I am putting that on the page because she has been waiting for me to admit on the page that her cooking is, in fact, better than mine. And the day I admit it is the day she will frame the page. The race came on. The broadcast had a short package on the contenders. There were a few names in the package my wife had been racing for years, and a couple of names she had been racing for less. The package had a little segment of footage from the last time my wife had run a 400-meter race in a stadium I am not going to bore you with the details of. Sydney watched the segment of herself the way Sydney watches segments of herself, which is from a slight distance, the way you might watch a sister you have not seen in a while. She had her hand on her stomach. She did not move it during the segment. The friends had not noticed yet. The hand had been there for an hour. The race ran. I will spare you the splits. The shorter version is that one of the women in the field went out hard. The field came back at her, and a woman crossed the line in a time that was, by Diamond League standards, the kind of time that gets the broadcasters excited. The room around us reacted. Some people stood up. Some people put their hands on their knees. Most people clapped. Two of our friends who had been at the 400-meter hurdles in Paris a couple of years earlier looked at Sydney and laughed in the way friends laugh when they want to make a small joke about how she should have been there. Sydney laughed back. She made a small, dry remark about how she was glad she had been on the couch. She did not, in any moment of the broadcast, say anything that was not true. I put my hand on her stomach. I did it under the blanket. I did it the way a husband does it. The two friends who had been making the small joke went back to their drinks. They had not seen the hand under the blanket. They had not been looking for it. A small specific thing happened a few minutes after the race. The broadcast was running its post-race interviews. The winner had said on camera the kind of things a woman says when she has just won a Diamond League 400. The reporter, a woman with a microphone, had pivoted at one point to a specific question about Sydney. The question had been, in essence, what does it mean to be racing this season in the absence of Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone? I will not give you the exact wording of the question or the answer, because the wording is in the public record and the answer is for the runner. I will tell you what I noticed in our living room when the question came on the screen. I noticed our friends going quiet for a second. I noticed Sydney's hand under my hand on her stomach. I noticed the ginger tea in her other hand, untouched. I noticed Sydney smiling in the small, specific way Sydney smiles when she is being talked about on television, and the talking is, for once, not about her at all. She said to me, in a voice quiet enough that the friends did not hear, "I am very happy for her." She meant it. I want you to know that she meant it. 3 years earlier, the woman on the couch would have said the same words, and they would have been, in the way of the woman she had been, a sentence she was making herself say. 3 years earlier was a long time ago. The woman on the couch had been doing the work of becoming a different woman, and the woman she was becoming had been working on the kind of relationship to other women's victories that the woman she had been would not have thought possible. The hand was on the stomach. The friends were drinking. The race was over. The next door was opening for the runner who was still standing at it. The runner today was somebody else. The next door, today, was hers. The friends left around 4. The last friend out the door was a woman who has known my wife since they were 11 years old, and who lingered in the kitchen for an extra 2 minutes to put a pot in the dishwasher, and who paused on her way to the front door with her hand on the door frame and looked back at the couch. Sydney was still on the couch. The blanket was still on her. The hand was, again, under the blanket. The friend looked at Sydney for a long second. The friend looked at me. The friend smiled in the small, specific way she has of smiling when she has put something together. She did not say anything. She walked out. She texted Sydney that night. The text said only, "In the way you text a person who has not yet told you a thing you have just figured out. I love you. I am so happy for you both. I will be here when you are ready to tell me." Sydney showed me the text. She put her head on my shoulder. She did not say anything for a while. The smaller thing that happened after the friend's text. We sat on the couch for an hour. The room got darker around us. The lamp on the side table was the lamp my wife had bought at a flea market the second month of our marriage. The lamp she had bargained the man down from $45 to $30. The lamp she had carried out of the flea market with a particular small look of triumph on her face that I had photographed and put on my phone as her contact picture. The lamp was on. The room was dim. My wife was on the couch with her hand on her stomach. She said to me, in the soft, small voice she uses when she has been thinking about a sentence for an hour before she says it out loud, "Andre, we need to plan the announcement." I knew what she meant. I had been waiting for her to say it. I will let her tell you about the beach. I will tell you, before I close this chapter, the small redemptive thing that I want on the page. I had been a man, 2 years earlier, who had been studying about love and not been doing it. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a Greek paradigm chart and a closing laptop, and a wife who had been brave enough to ask me to be in the room with her. The man I had been was the man I had needed, 2 years later, to be on a Saturday afternoon in early September in our living room, with the friends gone and the broadcast finished, and a pot of soup on the stove. The man on the couch with his hand under the blanket on his wife's hand on his wife's stomach was not the same man. He had been there. He had been learning to be there. The marriage was the thing. The marriage had been the thing. The marriage had, in some way I had not fully understood until that afternoon, made the man. The Atlantic was on the other side of the country. The Atlantic was waiting. We had a flight to book. Part 5. Made a Human. Chapter 17. Andre. The 2 lines. Picture a Saturday morning. I had been awake since before sunrise. I had been at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a Bible open to Psalm 16, because I had been that month reading Psalm 16 the way other men read the morning paper. There is a verse in Psalm 16, the verse I had underlined the morning of my wedding day, that goes, "The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance." I had read the verse that morning because the verse was, by then, my morning verse. I had not yet known, at 5:30 in the morning, that the verse was going to be a different verse by 7. She came out of the bathroom at 6:45. She was in a hoodie and the leggings she sleeps in. Her hair was up. She was holding a small white plastic stick. She did not say anything. She walked across the kitchen and held the stick up where I could see it. There were 2 lines on the stick. The lines were both the kind of dark you do not have to squint at. I had not seen a stick like that in person before. I had, from 1,000 jokes in NFL locker rooms and a few hundred conversations in Bible study small groups, an entirely theoretical understanding of what 2 lines on a stick like that meant. The theoretical understanding became, in the 8 inches between her hand and my face, the only thing in the room. I stood up out of the chair. I do not entirely remember doing it. We sat down on the bathroom floor, which is a thing I never thought I would do in my own home, with our backs against the bathtub, and we did not say anything for a full minute. I had stood, in my career, in 1,000 huddles. I had been on the 50-yard line at UVA before the snap. I had been at the line of scrimmage in 3 NFL stadiums in 3 cities. I had been in a great many huddles. I had not been in a huddle like that one. I prayed first. I prayed because I have always been the one who prays first when my wife and I are scared. The prayer was small and short and not at all theological. I said, Lord, thank you. We are scared. Help us. My wife squeezed my hand. She prayed second. Her prayer was even shorter. She said, thank you. That was the whole prayer. We sat there for another minute. We started to say things to each other that I am not going to put on the page because the things are ours. I will tell you the practical thing I said, because the practical thing is the kind of thing a Marine's son says when he is scared and trying not to let his wife see it. I said, we need to get an ultrasound. We need to make sure everything is fine. We need to find a doctor. My wife, who is the planner in our marriage, told me she had already made an appointment for the following Wednesday. I had been 1 minute behind her. I am, in our marriage, almost always 1 minute behind her. We went on Wednesday. The doctor did the kind of small, slow, careful sliding of an instrument across my wife's stomach that doctors do when there is a baby they are looking for. The screen showed a small dark shape inside a small lighter shape. The doctor pointed. The doctor said, that is the heart. The doctor said that is the head. The doctor said 8 weeks. The doctor said kidney bean. The doctor said due date. The due date was a real date. The kidney bean was a real kidney bean. We left the office with a paper sonogram strip in my hand. I put the strip on the dashboard of the car on the drive home. I did not turn the radio on. My wife did not turn the radio on. We drove in the kind of quiet a couple drives in when they have just been handed a piece of paper that has rearranged the years that follow. The first call we made when we got home was to her parents. Sydney called her mother. I called Senior. I had not, in the days since the bathroom floor, fully decided what kind of call I was going to make. I had decided that the call was going to be short. Senior picked up after one ring. He said, Junior. I said, Dad. Sydney is pregnant. He did not say anything for a few seconds. I have had Senior on the other end of a few of the most important phone calls of my life, and the silences before his answers are, in our family, a kind of language. He said finally, praise God. He said it the way he says it, which is once and without embellishment, and with the steady weight of a man who has been waiting for a grandchild for longer than I have been a husband. I said, I love you, Dad. He said, I love you too, son. He hung up. My mother, on the other end of the line at his house, picked up the receiver after he hung up and called back. My mother had her own questions. My mother had a great many questions. My mother was the woman in our family who would, the next 4 months, send my wife a small specific care package every 2 weeks, with peppermint tea and ginger candies and a small handwritten note that said, we are praying for the kidney bean. The next phone call was to Sydney's mother. I will not tell you about the call, because the call belongs to my wife and my mother-in-law. I will tell you that when Sydney came back to the kitchen after the call, her face was the face she had when her mother had told her at the bridal shower that she had been the wind beneath her wings. The lanes were changing again. The mother who had sat on the edge of her daughter's bed in the worst spring of her senior year of high school was, 4 pregnant months later, the first woman to put her hands on the news. About the night we decided what to do about the announcement. We had been holding the secret for a few months. We had told our parents. We had told our siblings. We had told a small handful of friends. The world had not yet been told. We were sitting in our living room after dinner. The starter was on the counter behind us. The lit window was lit. My wife had a small notebook in her lap. She had been making, in the notebook, a list of options for the announcement. She read me the list. The list had a kind of New Yorker cartoon at the bottom that I am not going to describe, and a video idea involving the dog we did not yet have, and a thing involving running shoes. She read the last item on the list. The last item was the beach. I asked her which beach. She said the same kind of beach. I knew which beach she meant. I had known which beach she meant since the first item on the list. We booked a beach. We picked a date. We picked a photographer. We picked a dress. We picked, again, salmon. The plan, at the end of the night, was a simple plan. We would go to a beach. We would eat salmon with our hands. We would hold a sonogram strip between us. We would, the next morning, post the photographs. The last thing about that night, my wife, who had been writing the caption in her head since the bathroom floor 4 months earlier, read me the caption. The caption was 11 words long. The caption was the kind of sentence you can fit on a bumper sticker and not lose anything. The caption was perfect. I told her so. She told me she had also been writing a longer caption, and that the longer caption would go underneath the first one, because the first one needed a few more sentences behind it. She read me the longer caption. I will let her give it to you in the next chapter, in the moment it belongs to. I will tell you what I felt when she read it. I felt the lines that had fallen, for both of us, in pleasant places. I felt the inheritance. I felt the 30 years of being a Marine son, and the 4 years of being a master's seminary student, and the 3 years of being a husband, and the 8 weeks, give or take, of being a father, all rising in my chest at the same time. I felt them as one thing. The thing was gratitude. The thing was the prayer Senior had been teaching me for 30 years without using a single theological word. The thing was, thank you. The Atlantic was waiting for us. We had a flight to catch. Chapter 18. Sydney, made a human, with my favorite human. There is a stretch of Atlantic coastline late in the afternoon where the light comes in low and a little gold, and the wind off the water is the kind of wind that lifts a hem and pulls a few loose strands of hair across a woman's face. We had picked the beach because of a beach. We had picked the dinner because of a dinner. The salmon was in a small white box at the cooler in the rented car. The plan was to take the photographs first and to eat the salmon afterward, and to walk the long way back to the car so we could be the only 2 people on the sand for as long as the sun would let us. I was 25 years old. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I was wearing a long white dress that had been chosen specifically for the way it would catch in the wind. And the wind, that afternoon, was reading its assignment. The photographer was a woman I had worked with 3 or 4 times before. She was 8 feet away. She was kneeling. She had a long lens. She had given us the directions for the first round of photographs at the start of the shoot, and we had, after a few minutes, more or less forgotten she was there. I was holding the sonogram strip in my hand. Andre was behind me. His left hand was at the small of my back. His right hand was inside my right hand. The strip was inside our joined hands. I had been thinking, all afternoon, about the first time we had been on a beach together, 4 years earlier, when we had been laughing too hard to remember the silverware, and we had eaten salmon out of our hands. I had been thinking about Lane 4. I had been thinking about the slide into my direct mentions, and the FaceTime Bible studies, and the haircut photograph from a month earlier that I had never told him I had figured out the same afternoon I had received it. I had been thinking about the rain on the morning of the wedding, and his sentence in the kitchen, and the candles on the steps, and Senior at the door watching the parking lot. The photographer asked us to look at each other. We looked at each other. I had his attention. He had his attention. The kidney bean inside my body, who had, 8 weeks earlier, started to be a person, had both of our attention, and was, in some small and precise way that I cannot explain to a person who has not been pregnant, beginning to give us hers. The photographer asked us to look at the strip. We looked at the strip. I had not, until that afternoon, fully understood what a sonogram strip felt like in a hand. I will tell you, the strip is light. The strip is the lightest piece of paper a woman who has been a sprinter her whole life has ever held in her hand. The strip is, in some way, lighter than a strip of paper has the right to be, given what is on it. There is a small dark shape on the strip. The shape is, on the day you receive the strip, the size of a kidney bean. The shape will, the technician has told you, double in size in the next 4 weeks, and again in the 4 weeks after that, and again, until the shape is the shape of a child your body is going to deliver. The photographer asked us to walk. We walked. I tucked my left hand into my right hand, where his hand already was, and we walked toward the line where the sand was darker because the tide was coming in. The photographer was behind us. She did not say anything for a while. The wind kept doing its job. The light kept doing its job. The Atlantic kept doing its job. The kidney bean kept doing its job. I had, in my head, the caption I had been writing in my head since the bathroom floor. The short caption first. The short caption was the caption I had built first, and the caption that would, the next morning, sit at the top of the post on Instagram. The short caption was 11 words. Made a human with my favorite human. The longer caption second. The longer caption was the one I had been adding sentences to in the back of my head for the 4 months between the bathroom floor and the beach. The longer caption was for the kidney bean. The longer caption was the sentence I had been writing as a prayer. Oh, how we have prayed for you, and the Lord has answered. You are our greatest blessing, and are already so loved. We are eagerly waiting to meet you. I had been leaning on my beloved for years. I had, at 21 years old in November of 2020, leaned on him on a couch in California in the worst year any of us had lived through, and I had decided, in the slow giving up of that month, to lean on him for the rest of my life. I had, at 22 years old in August of 2021, leaned on him in front of a row of candles in Scottsdale, with a videographer in the back seat of a car, and I had said yes to being the wife of a Marine son. I had, at 23 years old in May of 2022, leaned on him on a stage in Madison, Virginia, in the rain that nobody had ordered, and I had become Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone. I had, at 25 years old on a beach on the Atlantic, leaned on him with a kidney bean in my body and a wind in my hair, and I had been about to become a mother. I had all my life been imagining Lane 4. The baby would have a lane. The baby would have us. The last thing I said on the beach, because it is the last thing I'm going to say in this chapter. The photographer had asked us to hold the strip up to the sun. We held the strip up to the sun. The strip was thin enough that the sun came through it. The kidney bean was a small dark shape inside the small lighter shape inside the soft pink of my hand, inside the larger and darker hand of the man behind me. I looked at the strip. I felt the wind catch the dress. I said the sentence I had been carrying since hurdle 7 of the Paris race, the sentence I had said into Andre's ear that night in the hotel suite, the sentence that had stopped him breathing for a second. I said it again on the beach. I said it almost to myself. I said it the way a woman says a sentence to a person whose face she has not yet seen. I said, "Well, baby, you got my attention. How do I get yours?" Andre laughed. The wind caught the dress. The Atlantic kept doing its job. He had told me once, on the morning of our wedding, that it was not about the day. It was about the marriage. The marriage was the thing that had made the person. The person was the kidney bean inside my body, who had not yet been named, and who would, in 7 months and change, be born into a lane. For nobody else would want until she got there and made it hers. I said the only sentence I had left. Thank you, God. Epilogue. 2 lanes, 1 lane. The nursery is half painted. The walls are the shade of a soft sky, the color a young couple settles on after disagreeing for a few weeks about the kind of color a child's room is supposed to be. There is a pair of running shoes by the door. The shoes do not belong to the child. They belong to the mother, who has been walking again, in the long, slow way pregnant women walk in the 3rd trimester, mostly in the late afternoon, on a path near the canyon, with her husband behind her, at exactly the distance he has decided is correct for a husband walking behind a pregnant woman on a canyon path. The kitchen has a starter on the counter. The starter has a name. The starter is Today, alive and well, although it has been forgotten and fed and forgotten and fed many times. There is a Greek paradigm chart in a drawer in a side table, where the husband had been told some time ago to keep it during dinner. There is a Bible on the kitchen table. The Bible is open to the 8th chapter of the Song of Solomon. The verse the husband has been thinking about today is the same verse he had quoted on Instagram 4 years earlier, after his fiancée had posted the announcement of their engagement. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? He has been carrying the verse for 5 years now. He thinks today that the verse is about to mean something else entirely. He has been a man leaning on his beloved for 30 years. He has been a husband leaning on the beloved, with a wife on his arm for 3. He is about to be a father, and a father has, he is beginning to understand, his own way of leaning on his beloved. The husband puts down the Bible. The wife is asleep on the couch. The wife is not always asleep on the couch in the afternoons, but the wife is asleep on the couch this afternoon because the 3rd trimester is the trimester in which a great many women find that the body will choose for them when the body is going to rest. The husband watches her breathe. He watches her stomach rise and fall under the blanket. The blanket has small white stars on it. He prays the prayer he has been praying since the kitchen table conversation a 1.5 years earlier. Lord, prepare me to be the man you are preparing for the woman you are preparing for me. He is not anymore asking the Lord to prepare him to be the man for one woman. He is asking the Lord to prepare him to be the man for 2. His wife, half awake, says a word into the cushion. He cannot quite hear it. He leans down. She says the word again. The word is thanks. He smiles. He says the word back to her. He says, "Thank you, God." They have been saying that small, short prayer to each other, on and off, for 2 days now. the way couples will say the same prayer to each other when something has been given to them they had not expected. There is a phone in a frame on the kitchen counter. The phone has a photograph on its screen that is a still of the maternity shoot reel from a few months earlier. The still is the one with the wind in the dress and the strip held up to the sun. The husband has, more than a few times, picked the phone up off the counter and looked at the photograph for longer than he meant to. The wife shifts on the couch. She wakes up halfway. She opens her eyes. She looks at her husband across the room. He looks at her. They have been looking at each other across rooms for 5 years now. The looking has become, in the way looking can become for two people who have done it long enough, the language they speak best. The husband walks to the couch. He kneels next to the couch. He puts his hand on his wife's stomach. The stomach has, in the seconds since he put his hand on it, kicked his hand. He says, "Good morning, baby." He says it to the stomach. The wife smiles. The baby is not born yet. The baby is, in some real and specific way, already here. The notebook on the table next to the couch has a few sentences in it that the husband has been writing for the last week. The sentences are the start of a sermon. The sermon is the first sermon the husband is going to preach in a small, mostly empty sanctuary on the East Coast, the year after the baby is born. The wife has read the first paragraph of the sermon. She has told him it is good. She has also told him, in the language of a wife to a husband who is being a little too careful with his words, that the sermon could use a little more of him in it. He has been working on putting a little more of himself in it. He has been, for 30 years now, the son of a Marine, and a Marine son does not, by training, put himself into the sentences he is preparing for somebody else to hear. The wife is teaching him too. The wife has been teaching him too, in the small, slow way wives teach their husbands to do things, since the first week of their first year of marriage. The light over the kitchen sink stays on. The starter rises in the jar. The phone in the frame on the counter has the photograph of the wind in the dress. The dog the couple does not yet have is, somewhere in a shelter in the next county over, waiting to be picked up. The baby in the wife's body is, somewhere in the wife's body, listening. I want to give you, before I go, the 3 lines this book has been carrying. I have earned the right to give them to you in the broken cadence I have asked you not to read for 15 chapters, because the cadence is finally the cadence the moment requires. Lane 4, leaning on her beloved. They had each other's attention. They always would. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. The Atlantic, somewhere on the other side of the country, kept doing its job. Author's note. If you have made it to this last page, thank you for the 2 hours. This book is inspired by publicly available material about Sidney McLaughlin-Levrone and Andre Levrone Jr. The events on these pages are real. The interior of these chapters, what each of them was thinking on a given afternoon, what they whispered to each other in a hotel room at the end of a long night, has been dramatized in the spirit of 2 lives that have been lived more publicly than most. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. Nothing scandalous, nothing salacious, and nothing about their private family that they have not already offered to the public has been invented. I want to thank Sidney and Andre for living the kind of public, faithful, hard-fought, joyful marriage that this kind of book gets to be written about. I do not know either of them personally. I have watched the same races you have watched, read the same memoir you can buy in any airport, listened to the same podcasts, and read the same interviews. The work in front of you is what one writer made of the public archive of their lives. They did the living, I did the writing. If their story has reminded you in any specific way of someone in your own life you have been meaning to call, I hope you will call. If their story has reminded you in any specific way of a marriage you have been meaning to fight for, I hope you will fight. If their story has reminded you in any specific way that the Lord is in the habit of preparing two strangers on opposite coasts for each other, long before either of them has any idea what he is up to, I hope you will trust him. The kidney bean is, as of the day this book went to press, doing well. So are her parents. Books by Barron / Love Stories series. Barron Darby.